Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at House Lannister. Oh, I've just realised I left the Cleganes behind me. Well, um, we can cope. Today we're looking at House Lannister, which is clearly one of the biggest, most important houses in the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms. We've got a lot to get through. I've got masses of questions from my patrons. But what I will do, which is fantastic, some really good questions in there. What I'll do, as I always try to, is just start with a little bit of an overview. I'll keep this a little bit shorter than usual because we're going to get into a lot of detail with the patrons' questions. As always, I'll also try and pick up as much as I can from the chat as we're going through. House Lannister. So, House Lannister is a very old house. We don't know exactly how old they are. Um, they first appear with the legend of Lan the Clever. Um, the time the people in charge of Casterly Rock were House Casterly. We don't know huge amounts about them, but they were situated there on the west coast of Westeros, this massive rock standing alone. Um, it's a couple of leagues long. It's three times the height of the wall. It's huge, and at the top of this, they built a ring fort, and that was their home. And they started digging into the rock. How long they were there for, we do not know exactly, but at some point we get Lan the Clever arriving. And now, Lan the Clever, is he in the Dawn Age? Is he in the Age of Heroes? Again, we don't have huge amounts of detail. We also don't have one clear myth. What we do have are a lot of different stories, each with the same outcome, that Lan the Clever ended up in control of Casterly Rock. And from that moment onwards, House Lannister were in charge. The most popular version of this legend is that Lan the Clever managed to make his way into the rock, which had already got rooms and chambers cut deep into it by taking off his clothes, putting butter over his body and squeezing through little cracks, finding his way in, and pretending to be a ghost and scaring the residents until they ran off or they died of fright. He then married the women who were left for some reason, and became House Lannister. That is their origin story. Now, what happens after that is they become the kings of the rock. And for a long time, they ruled over that part of what we now think of as being the Westlands. It has a few low-lying lands, but typically we've got quite a lot of mountains. And as they discovered over time, very rich reserves of particularly gold and silver. Now, at some point a long while ago, the Lannister line split, and we have the Lannisters of Lannisport, a town growing into a city, a port city just outside Casterly Rock, which is incredibly rich. It's also the last. If you're doing a coastal route around Westeros, it's the last main port city on the west coast. At that point, you generally turn around and go back to Old Town and then across the south, and then maybe around to King's Landing when it's there, or all the way back over to Essos. So this became quite a hub, and this is where the Lannisters started gaining their riches from. They had gold mines. They and the vassal houses in their area had gold mines and silver mines. A very strong industry of smithing grew up, and this was what tempted traders to be coming all the way around to the far side of Westeros, picking up their gold, heading back. Now, when the Andal invasion came, we were looking at the Andal invasion quite a lot when we were talking about the Vale. During that, as we've said many times, this was not what we perceive of as an invasion. This wasn't just a whole mass of people coming across at one time, attacking everyone in their way. This was a very long uh, armed immigration is probably the best way of saying it, boat by boat, group by group, heading over from Essos into Westeros. And first of all, they encountered the Vale, and then they headed west, and then more west, and eventually they did reach the Westerlands. And the approach of the people in the Westerlands was uh, less confrontational, it has to be said, than in the Vale. In the Vale, there was this very much uh, let's try and fight them. If you remember, there's the battles. We had the House Royce, the last of the First Men Kings, led this great coalition against them. That didn't really happen in the Westlands, and it didn't take huge amounts of time before even House Lannister had decided that they would marry in to get some Andals married into the family, make sure that there wasn't a problem. And eventually, at some point, actually, you're left with a Lannister daughter married to the only Lannister daughter left, married to an Andal king who'd come in, and the line formally, although it obviously retained some First Men heritage, formally became Andal rather than First Men. The Kings of the Rock persisted, and over a long period of time, the um, the the land that they ruled slowly expanded. It has to be said this was incredibly slow. This wasn't like the Starks, who started out with just Winterfell, and over time, long time, but they took every single bit of the north. In the Westerlands, we just get every now and then we hear a story of, and then they went and they captured Fair Isle, they added Fair Isle to their lands or something like that. This was not a huge expansionist approach. They never really looked at going down into the Reach. There were a few border battles, but there was never a plan to sort of extend out into the Reach, into the Riverlands. They seemed largely happy with where they were, which had a natural defensive barrier. It has to be said, the mountains that stretched right across the eastern edge of the Westerlands. Now, um, all this remained largely the same until we get to the Targaryen invasion. Now, the Lannisters, at this point, uh, they did wish to oppose the Targaryens. The Targaryens had come in, they'd taken on the a lot of the first groups of people they met in and around the Riverlands, but the lords down in the west and south of Westeros, particularly the Lannisters and the Gardeners, who at the time ruled the Reach, they decided they would form a grand coalition to oppose these Targaryens, who still had, in terms of conventional army, quite a small force. And so the Lannisters and the Gardeners came together and took on the Targaryen army. And they had them outnumbered, and they were probably going to win. But that was when the three Targaryens on their dragons all came to the same battlefield. It became known as the Field of Fire. And the three dragons just breathed fire over the combined Lannister Gardener army, and they were destroyed. The Gardener line, it was destroyed completely. That's how the Tyrells, will come on to them another time, I'm sure. That's how the Tyrells came to power. By being put in place by the Targaryens. The Lannisters saw what happened and bent the knee, and they took the sensible route out. By this point, it had become reasonably established that if you fought against the Lannisters and did not back down, then you would get killed. If you bent the knee, they would let you live, and often let you keep the lands that you had before. And that's what happened with the Lannisters. And for the first century or so of the Targaryen rule, the Lannisters it's not that they stayed out of politics. They did get involved a few times, but they weren't at the heart of what was happening in Westeros. What we see, particularly even as far as the Dance of the Dragons, you will see that the Lannisters aren't there as one of the top most powerful families. You had the Targaryens at the top. Underneath them, you had the Baratheons and you had the Velaryons, and also the Hightowers, being such an ancient house with links across to the Faith of the Seven and the Maesters. The Lannisters were rich, but they weren't at the center of power until we got to, as I say, roughly the time of the Dance of the Dragons, where geopolitics was starting to play. One element that we don't often talk about in the 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 build up to the Dance. We often talk about what's going on with the Targaryens. Understandably, that is what really drove the Dance of the Dragons. We often talk about the role of the Hightowers. What we often don't think about is what the impact of the Targaryens and the Velaryons having on the east coast of Westeros might have had on the west coast of Westeros. So remember that the Lannisport was the source of a huge amount of Lannister wealth because they had all these gold and riches that they could tempt people all the way round to the far side. It's all very well having gold, but if no merchants are coming to take it and buy it from you, then it's not much is going to be happening. So what happened though was that when the Targaryens arrived, they established King's Landing. This grew to be a huge city. This grew to be a huge port, attracting a huge amount of trade. Similarly, the Velaryons, particularly under Corlys, became hugely rich. They became the richest family in all of Westeros. And Spicetown developed on Driftmark. This became another hub, a port hub over on the east coast. And actually, this was a geopolitical risk for the west coast of Westeros, which until that moment had been the richest, the most prosperous part of all of Westeros. This was where people went. Old Town, the biggest, oldest city there. With the Reach, with its huge agricultural world, and then up to Lannisport, the second biggest port. Suddenly, they were being put in the shade by what was happening over with the Targaryens and Velaryons on the east coast. So it makes for natural allies when we get to sort of past the year 100 into towards when the Dance of the Dragons happens. It makes for natural allies for the Lannisters and the Hightowers to be starting to be on the same side. And sure enough, when the Hightowers started to gain power, when Otto Hightower was out there as Hand of the King, he was starting to put his people into the small council, and he put Tyland Lannister into the small council to be the master of coin. So during the Dance of the Dragons, Tyland Lannister had a huge impact, actually, it has to be said. I've got a couple of questions on him, so I'm not going to get into great amounts of detail. I hope they show this on House of the Dragon. He, as Master of Coin, it is his decision. We did see it very briefly in season 1. It is his decision to take the treasury, the state treasury, and split it into 4 parts. One part went to the Iron Bank and Bravos, one part went down to Old Town, one part went to Casterly Rock, and one part stayed in King's Landing and was used to fund the war effort. This actually had a huge impact on the war because and spoilers here, I suppose. The rule here, we always try and say the rule here is that book spoilers are okay, show spoilers are not okay, but obviously the show may well be doing things that happen in the books. I have no spoilers for the show. I know as much about what's going to happen as you do. I've seen the trailers as you have. I've got no inside information. But in the books, what happens is When Rhaenyra takes King's Landing, she discovers the money's gone. Um, and she's got a starving population, and she's got a war effort to fund. And so Tywin Lannister gets captured, and a lot of the people who were there, they just kill, but they keep Tywin Lannister alive, and they torture him because they want to find out where this gold has gone, and he does not say. He survives under torture for 6 months. Um, and he survives all the way through to the far side of the Dance of the Dragons and becomes Hand of the King the other as the country emerges into, or the nation merges into, the new reign of, or the regency of Aegon III. After that, the Lannisters, the House of Velaryon, have been hugely reduced in power. The Hightowers have also, to a certain degree. They sort of keep themselves to themselves for a while, and the Lannisters slowly start to gather power. Um, until we get to a position between 200 and 250-ish in or even a little bit later than that, actually, in the sorry, I'm getting my words muddled up. After the conquest, during that era, when we get Tyland Lannister, or sorry, Titus Lannister, who is the father of Tywin Lannister, who is, by all accounts, a very weak ruler. Now, what this means is that um, he can't keep his own vassals under control. And to the extent where that some ask him for money, big loans, and he gives them, and then they say, "Well, actually, I can't pay you back," and he goes, "Okay, that's fine." And so some other people come and get money from him, and he doesn't oppose them, doesn't try and take it back. And people then start mocking him in his own hall, and the Lannisters lose a huge amount of power and wealth. The end of that, though, is when Tywin Lannister takes on House Rain and House Tarbeck. Now, this is where the Reigns of Castamere comes in. Castamere was the castle for House Rain, and Tywin took the battle to them. They were basically an open rebellion against the Lannisters. He took the battle to them, and this was like Casterly Rock. This was a castle built into the rock, basically underground. And there was a lake next to it. He broke the banks of the lake and funneled the water into where they lived, their underground castle. And the whole castle just filled up with water. The entire House Rain was horribly killed, and Tywin Lannister just eliminated the house completely. And that is why the song "The Reigns of Castamere" is seen as a threat. This is why you just now Tywin would just send to somebody threatening rebellion, he would just send a bard to go and sing "The Reigns of Castamere," just to remind people this is what he does to people who oppose the Lannisters. He doesn't just like take them down a peg. He will absolutely wipe them off of the face of the planet and destroy their line completely in a horrible way. So that's why the Reigns of Castamere is quite so important. Tywin eventually became Lord, and became friends with young Prince Aerys, who then became Aerys II, and who we know as the Mad King. And I think the rest of it we probably know. As I say, I've got a lot of questions coming up, so that's skating over the history there. Let's go to some questions from the chat. Auntie Slayer saying, Patreon only let me sub at the $2 tier on mobile. I'm sorry about that. Not sure what's going on there. I'll have a look into that. Just sending this as a show of appreciation to Robert and the mods. Well, I hugely appreciate that. Thank you very much. I turned 30 on Sunday, and this stream is the perfect way to start the weekend. Well, a happy name day for Sunday. I hope you have a fantastic time. Thank you very much indeed. And I think I had another. I think I had another question there somewhere. Maybe I can't find it. Oh well. Blitzer, thank you very much for a very kind comment there in the chat. Oh, Michael Trainer, can you speculate on how a marriage between Cersei and Rhaegar might have changed her character? Clearly, there would be some consistencies: love for her children, Lannister pride, Maggie the Frog. But what would be different? Oh, this is a really interesting one. So, Cersei was, when she was young, Tywin was Hand of the King, and Tywin, and when she was young, as in still a child, Tywin was Hand of the King and he saw an opportunity to marry his daughter. The Lannisters were the second most powerful, in his mind at least, family in the land, and Prince Rhaegar, was the only Targaryen. He didn't have any sisters, and so Tywin saw the opportunity. Rhaegar has to marry somebody, and they had a attorney at Casterly Rock, and the plan was for Tywin to ask Aerys and suggest this marriage between their two houses. Cersei to be married to Prince Rhaegar. Aerys flat out refused. And he basically said, we don't marry the servants. A huge slap in the face for Tywin. We know about this because Cersei was told about it by her aunt Jenna. That's one of Tywin's only sister, one of his 4 siblings. Her aunt Jenna said, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be a feast, and at the feast it will be announced that you are going to be engaged to Rhaegar. The feast never happened. He asked Jenna what went on, why didn't it? And Jenna told her the story. And since that moment, Cersei became really quite obsessed with Rhaegar, with wanting to marry Rhaegar. She still thinks about him, even after she's married to Robert Baratheon. Even when we get into the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, even then she's sort of absent-mindedly thinking about how beautiful Rhaegar was, and how, what their children would be like and what it would have been like. So this does focus her mind. And there's I think I did a short video a while ago. There's a fascinating balance here. In balance, perhaps is the wrong word. Irony. Robert Baratheon. We often think about Robert Baratheon and how obsessed he became with Lyanna, and how he would be thinking about her all the time. Cersei was actually equally obsessed with Rhaegar, and so the two of them who married each other were kind of living out this sad echo of what they both wanted. Was never going to happen. Rhaegar didn't want to marry Cersei. Lyanna didn't want to marry Robert. But the two people who could have married them ended up being married themselves. So how might this have changed Cersei? Well, I mean, I think her character would probably have stayed the same. I think the difference is the context to her actions, is that where she developed as an adult, as queen, was very much the Lannisters are here secretly in control in King's Landing. Robert Baratheon may technically have been king, but the Lannisters had a vice-like grip on power there, really. That would not have been the case had she married Rhaegar. The Targaryens would still very much be in power. and the whole situation would have been quite different. She would probably have, at least to start with, have been happier in her marriage. So would she have still been sleeping with Jaime? I don't know, but I think there's probably a fair chance that she would have had Rhaegar's children. Um, uh, it's an interesting thought experiment that we don't know we don't know, but probably she would have developed a little bit less sure of her own ability to get her way and deceive everyone. Um, Question from Commander Ray. This is a channel membership request. If you become a channel member, you get free questions highlighted in the chat. And Commander Ray, you're now a member for 6 months, so thank you very much. Saying thanks, Robert, for the great streams and videos, and the mods for their hard work, and Dan for being a good boy. I'm watching as I write for a D&D campaign. Well, I hope that goes well. Dan is indeed being a good boy. He's taken himself up to bed tonight already. But this is an early chance for a shout out to the moderators. Moderators, you do fantastic work. If you are here in the chat, could you just show them a little bit of love? Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to some questions from my patrons. The Rabbi Mitra saying salutations to Robert and Dan the dog. I hope you're doing well. I am, thank you. From the many stories of Lan the Clever involving the Reach in the Westerlands, none of them seem to explain how this character ever had hair as golden as the sun. So my tinfoil idea is that Lan the Clever is actually someone who came from the east via the Sunset Sea into western regions of Westeros and applied himself using clever tactics and situations. How much do you align with this tinfoil, since we can never be too sure around old legends? The original Hightowers, Danes, and Iron Island folks, thanks to the Grey King, all have hair colour in alignment with Lan, and there is enough evidence to suggest that they all came from the far east, the Great Empire of the Dawn. Okay, so one of the legends does say where Lan the Clever's hair colour comes from. Though it's perhaps unhelpful. It says that he stole gold from the sun to brighten his hair. So there's clearly a reference there across to Lannister gold. But might he have come from the far east? Might he come from the same kind of people as the Danes, the Hightowers, etc.? So the Hightowers are often, they're referred to as having gold or silver hair, so it's not just the same as the Lannisters. The Danes have a variety of hair colours, it has to be said. Some of them are even dark. Ashara Dane had dark hair. Now, what's interesting with the Danes is that some people had speculated a long time ago that House Dane might be from the same genetic descent as Valyrians, because they often had silver hair, not all of them as we've seen, but they often had silver hair and purple eyes. And George R. R. Martin said that's just a coincidence, basically. So I think it's probably fair to say Lan the Clever may well have come from the east. There's one rumor, a part of the legend, that he was an Andal. The timing seems entirely wrong for that, but perhaps this might be reflective of the fact that he comes from Essos. My general take is that, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. At this early moment in time, though, everyone in Westeros, and we're talking very early here, that the Castlys obviously preceded the Lannisters, so Lan wasn't the very first or among the very first group of people to come across. But at that time, everybody had just come across. This was potentially Dawn Age rather than Age of Heroes, we're told. So it's a long, long time ago. Every human in Westeros had, at some point in the preceding few generations, come across from Essos. So I'm very happy to entertain this. I don't think that this would have a significant impact on the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire, though. Um, Let's go to a question from Cookie Tywin. I'd love to know your thoughts on Johanna Lannister, née Westerling, from the time of the Dance of the Dragons, because she sounded like a real lioness. I could be wrong, but didn't she defend Lannisport against the Ironborn while all the Civil War chaos was going on? Uh, yes-ish. I mean, I think the answer is yes. She is clearly a strong, indomitable woman. Um, you will see, and we have seen in House of the Dragon, a couple of Lannisters, the twins, Jason and Tyland. Jason was the Lord, Tyland his younger brother. Tyland was the cleverer one. He was the one who became the Master of Coin. He was there in King's Landing during the start of the dance, and indeed through most of the dance. Jason, however, was Lord back in Casterly Rock, and he gathered together the Lannister army and marched to war. So he, in the Battle of the Red Fork, though, he died. Tywin Lannister was stuck in King's Landing, and the heir was only 4 years old, I think. And so Lady Johanna, the bereaved wife, took control, and she basically ran House Lannister for uh, the few years of the dance and also the period after, because Tyland stayed on in King's Landing, as we've seen, and then died. So while her son was growing up, she basically ruled in Casterly Rock. Now, during this time, the Greyjoys took the opportunity, Dalton Greyjoy took the opportunity to just go back to their old ways. That Westeros was in civil war. They might as well just come start raiding the west coast of Westeros like the good old days, the Ironborn Reavers, and they did. And there was one massive attack that they did on Lannisport. Now, the reason why I said sort of in answer to your question is that actually, with that first attack, Johanna took a very, let's call it, pragmatic approach, and she barricaded herself and her family inside Casterly Rock and sort of, I wouldn't say abandoned Lannisport, but Lannisport was raided. People were carried off. Lots of people were killed. Riches were taken, and she was safe. And the main House Lannister was safe, but Lannisport was not fully defended. However, once she'd gathered breath a little bit, figured out a plan, she then went down, and although the Lannister fleet had been burned during that same raid, she then went down, formed a quick alliance with some friends in the Reach, pulled together an army, put the army on the fleet that she got from the Reach, and then they went and took the battle back to the Iron Islands, and they won. And Dalton Greyjoy was delivered to her, and he was gelded, and he was made to be a fool for her young son. So he was humiliated, and she then ruled effectively for the next 10 years or so. So yes, an indomitable woman. There were quite a few strong female leaders actually during the Dance of the Dragons. We'd focus in on people like Rhaenyra, Rhaenys, Alicent as well. There's also Jane Arryn, who I think from publicity photos we're going to be seeing in House of the Dragon season 2. So this wasn't, yes, this was quite rare, but this was during that period there was quite a lot of female leaders going on across Westeros. Paul Taylor, if any of Tywin's kids were the spawn of the Mad King, which would you find the most impactful? I've got some questions on this a little bit later, but if you've never come across this theory before, it's a fascinating one. That we know that the Mad King, Aerys II, he had the hots for Joanna Lannister. That's not the Johanna that we were talking about just one moment ago, but the wife of Tywin Lannister. and on at least a couple of occasions made some inappropriate advances, shall we say. Did it ever go further than that? We're not told. But this has sparked theories, rumors that one, two, maybe all three of Tywin's children are actually not his. Now, you will find on my main channel, I can't remember, maybe 6 months ago or so, I did a video about Cersei. What's the evidence that maybe Cersei is the Mad King's daughter? Quite sort of, in terms of character, quite a lot actually when you start to dig into it. If you read A Feast for Crows in particular, from her point of view, so much of her character is very the love of wildfire, the paranoia, even down to like some crazy plans she has to be building a white city on the other side of the river Blackwater. This is all the Mad King. So that's possible. Jaime, uh, obviously they're twins, so you have to get into some rather technical science if you think that Cersei might be and him not. But he clearly seems the least likely. There's no character indications that he's like the Mad King. But obviously there would be a great irony in the fact that he killed the Mad King. He killed Aerys II, so he wouldn't just be a kingslayer, he would be a kinslayer as well. And then Tyrion, I have a question about this specifically. Tyrion, the potential for Tyrion to be a Targaryen is, out of all of the tinfoil-ish theories out there, the one that I vacillate on the most. Almost every time I think about it, I err on a slightly different side. Which do I think would be most impactful for the story? Probably Tyrion, I would have to say, partly because um, of the irony of what this means for him and Tywin, um, and partly because George R. R. Martin originally structurally set up Tyrion to be echoing Jon and Daenerys. And what I mean by that is he is a child who never knew his mother or father because his mother died giving birth to him. If he is Tyrion Targaryen, then he was brought up by a man who was not his own father. We're told right from the very beginning, he's obsessed with dragons. He gazes into the flames. He seems to have this connection with the dragon skulls in King's Landing and Red Keep when he goes there. So all of that is set up. And then in terms of what impact this is going to have, he is going to come into contact with the dragons way earlier in the story than either Cersei or Jaime will. So he would be the most impactful, I would say. Auntie Slayer saying, if Tywin was willing to pay an alleged fortune for a Valyrian steel longsword, how are the Lannisters unaware of the cat's paw dagger? Theories Joffrey happened to have it and gave it to an assassin seem unlikely. Well, interesting. So the Valyrian steel dagger, what we call the cat's paw dagger, is actually, might even be tomorrow. I've got a video coming out on who hired the cat's paw assassin, which is one of the earliest mysteries and drivers of the action in A Song of Ice and Fire. But the theory isn't that Joffrey had, and hey, spoilers for that video, it was Joffrey. But the theory isn't that Joffrey had this dagger lying around. The dagger was Robert Baratheon's. It belonged to him. Now, we've seen this. I think we can count this as semi-canon, being in House of the Dragon. This dagger was passed down from Targaryen ruler to Targaryen ruler. Viserys wears it through House of Dragon season 1. It's got the writing on it. So this is a king's dagger. And Robert Baratheon will have claimed it when he claimed the Iron Throne. So that's why he had it. And it got included amongst all of the luggage when the court basically went up to Winterfell. So we shouldn't underestimate. This wasn't just like a little trip to see his mate. This was a 6 months. The entire mechanism of running the country basically moved. Some of the small council obviously stayed back in King's Landing, but moved up all the way to the north to Winterfell. And so this was Robert Baratheon. House Baratheon, as far as we can tell, also did not have a Valyrian steel sword. So there's every chance, although we're not told about it explicitly, there's every chance that Robert Baratheon counted this as one of his prized possessions, that he'd got a Valyrian, he'd inherited. They might not have got the 2 Valyrian steel swords that House Targaryen once had, but he had inherited a Valyrian steel dagger. So this was part of the belongings that went all the way north, goes the theory. Joffrey sort of picked it out, didn't really have much of an idea about what this was worth, and so that gave it to the assassin. So the Lannisters would have been aware of it, but it was the king's, so they couldn't just take it. Darius Hutchinson, will the Lannisters hold the rock in the end? I will get into a lot more detail on this in some questions when I get there. I think the House Lannister will survive is one of the things I would say. That it's very much worth noting that on the TV show, House Lannister was actually quite small. We had Jaime, Cersei, Tyrion. We had Jaime and Cersei's children, Tywin, Kevin. There was sort of like a couple of other random Lannisters that we sort of heard about early on. Lancel, of course, but they all pretty much died, leaving Tyrion. That's not the case in the books. There's a lot more Lannisters just hanging around. Tywin had 4 siblings who all had children. So Geryon had a bastard child rather than a sort of an official child, it has to be said. But they all had children, and some of those have had children. So we're looking at quite a lot of Lannisters. So the Lannisters will survive. Casterly Rock itself as a place will survive. I said before, and I'll say again, I do not think we're going to get the 20 years later kind of last wrap-up chapter, this is what happened after the story from George R. R. Martin. But I think we'll get a few hints, and it would not surprise me if the Lannisters keep Casterly Rock. Question from Commander Ray in the chat, just saying, I think all of Tywin's kids are his, but I think George wants there to be some ambiguity. I would not disagree with certainly the second half of that. I think George R. R. Martin is very, very happy for us to be uncertain about the parentage of all of those 3 siblings. He's okay with us not knowing ever. Martin S. Saying, good evening, Robert. I have no House Lannister question at the moment, having asked several before, so I decided to just send a couple of links to Lannister-related Ted Naismith images on Patreon. I did get them. Thank you very much. Yeah, they're very interesting. I hadn't seen either of them before. And being sort of black and white, not typical Ted Naismith, but I very much appreciated that. Thank you, Martin. Agree. Weirwood saying, when they were looking to buy a sword long ago, didn't Rhaegar have it? In terms of the dagger, if that's what we're talking about here, I think the working assumption is that this is something that the king had, so Aerys probably had it, but we do not know. Mara Lee, hi there, Mara. Good to see you. Saying just a show of love and support for the great stories, merch, and content. You are loved and the best. Hugs to Dan, your handsome dog. Thank you very much, and that's very generous, Mara. Thank you for that. And also saying for the mods, thank you. Right. Let's go to Lord Medici, saying most of the kingdoms seem to have a strong number of second-tier houses: Carstark, Bolton, Manderley, and Umber in the north, Royce, Waynwood, Corbray in the Vale, Blackwood, Bracken, Mallister in the Riverlands, etc. The Westlands, possibly alongside the Stormlands, seems unique in having weak second-tier houses. Why do you think this is? To an extent, it might be because the Lannisters put them down, ask the Rains, but do you think it can be all attributed to the Lannisters' actions? Or do you think there's any reason why the Westlands just seems to produce less powerful second-tier houses ex ante? Okay, so I mean, I find this a fascinating question because we actually, our understanding of the Westlands is less than many of the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. By which I mean we know a lot about the North. The majority of the points of view chapters that we have, particularly in Book One, are Starks. And when you think about it, of all the POV chapters you have in Book One, we've got Ned, you've got Bran, you've got Sansa, you've got Arya, you've got Jon. Lots and lots of Stark POVs. And the journey that we have in the Song of Ice and Fire takes us down to King's Landing. We go into the Vale a couple of times. We have the trips through the Riverlands a lot. We have POVs happening later on in the story, in Dawn and the like. We never actually go to the Westerlands. It's similarly the Reach, incidentally. George R. Martin has said that we will. We are going to go to Casterly Rock in the story, but it means that whereas we have Tyrion or Cersei or whoever occasionally thinks back to the Westerlands, that's not really their home base a lot of the time. It's King's Landing is their home base. So we get a lot less information about the politics of what's going on in the Westerlands. And because the Lannisters at the moment, as you allude to in your question, they have been very strong for a while, and any strong vassals have been very firmly put back in their place. We never get any kind of little rumors of this house rebelling or anything like that. It seems very simple. They say, oh, well, we need to get another army together. Let's do that and tell people to be sending us troops. And it seems very simple. So the other noble families of the Westlands seem relatively weak compared to the very strong Boltons and Manderleys and whoever. Now, is that actually the case? I think not through history. I think it's probably fair to say that there have been times when House Rain has been very powerful. House Farman came to particular prominence. If you've read Fire and Blood, you remember House Farman suddenly getting quite powerful. There are another few houses, the Westlings, quite powerful as well. There are some strong houses there. I just think they at the moment they're kept down by the strength of overpowering strength of House Lannister, and perhaps there aren't any houses because the house in charge of their main city port, Lannisport, is a cadet branch of the Lannisters of Lannisport. Then there isn't a natural massive extra house. But yeah, it's an interesting observation. I don't think it's quite as stark as it might first appear because of the POV situation. And Lord Medici goes on sort of on a sort of a tangent from this, saying historically, Lannister lords have married women from relatively minor houses. We hear of a Marbrand, a Westerling, 4 times widowed Weber. Even Lord Tywin married within his own house rather than using his marriage to cement an alliance with another powerful house. Why do you think this is? Although the great houses were less likely to marry houses from outside their kingdom prior to the main story, there are several instances of this happening, like the Starks marrying Blackwoods and Royces. Um, the Lannisters seem to have a desire to climb the ladder towards the Iron Throne. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but George R. R. Martin's world is generally well constructed. So why might this be? I think. I mean, I think again, it's a really interesting perspective to look at this from. Personally, I mean, there have been marriages outside of the Westerlands, for example. There is, if you dig through, you'll find the marriage to a Baratheon. The Jenna Lannister married Aemon Frey. Now that was generally seen as being a big step down for them, but the Freys are a rich and powerful house in the Riverlands. So this is a powerful house outside of the Westerlands. So there have been a few of these other marriages outside of the Westerlands, but this and Tywin himself tried to arrange marriages for his children to other powerful houses. So there was a plan at one point for Jaime to be marrying Lysa Tully, who later becomes Lysa Arryn. He plots, as we've seen already, to try and get Cersei married to Rhaegar Targaryen. So Tywin definitely saw the advantage of this. Prior to this, it's probably worth sort of just saying the Lannisters weren't that expansionist back in time. They were very happy running the Westerlands. They're very happy just being rich and living in Casterly Rock. There's not much of a history of them wanting to take on the rest of Westeros. So the need, therefore, for them to be marrying outside of the Westerlands was relatively limited. And it's also worth pointing out that before you get to Charis, really, the road network across the Seven Kingdoms was not great. So actually transport between these different places was a lot harder. So the idea of marrying other families outside your local area was a lot harder. So do they marry outside less? I think probably a little bit, but it's about the same as if you were to compare them to, say, the Lannisters or the Dornish, that being a sort of on the outside rather than somewhere focused in on the central politics of the Seven Kingdoms, they tended not to, even within the Targaryen era, those houses were not doing huge amounts of intermarrying. Username redacted. Do you think Tyrion will confront Cersei in Fagon's takeover of King's Landing? And what would Cersei's likely reaction be to a small folk uprising? Will Tyrion confront Cersei in Fagon's takeover of King's Landing? I think the iteration of events will mean that that's a no. Tyrion at the moment is in Meereen and waiting for the Battle of Meereen to finish. He will then very probably, assuming he survives, he will end up in Meereen, waiting for Dany to return. And then with Dany, we assume at some point they will then be heading west with her, by then probably massive army and dragons, to head over to Westeros. By that point, Fagon will have already taken King's Landing, I think. I think that Fagon, for those who don't know who Fagon is, this is the character claiming to be Aegon the Sixth. A lot of us think that he actually isn't Aegon the Sixth, therefore fake Aegon, Fagon. Now, he, I think, will take King's Landing. I think there will be some sort of revolt against Cersei. Um, the the conditions in King's Landing are already pretty poor. She seems to be willfully ignoring the need to be bringing food in for the small folk, um, and uh, and she doesn't really care much about the small folk at all. And added to which, she is very probably going to jump to the conclusion that Varys wants her to jump to, that the Tyrells have uh, taken on, have killed Kevin Lannister. Now, she will respond by attacking the Tyrells in some way. Uh, whether it's exactly what they did on the show, the blowing up of the Great Sept, she seems quite obsessed with wildfire at the moment, so something along those lines definitely would not surprise me. And I think that what that means is that even more of the small folk are going to be turning against her. A small folk uprising, she will not, she will just think, oh, well, I'll just stay here. But they will then be welcoming this new person who claims to be the Targaryens, welcoming him into King's Landing. If you remember, actually, you get that image that Dany got in the House of the Undying, of what we're all thinking is Fagon, as being like this mama's dragon being held aloft with cheering crowds. We don't think about these cheering crowds much, but he's going to be popular. Why is he going to be popular in comparison to what came before him, which was Cersei? So um, I think she'll be driven out of King's Landing long before Tyrion gets there. There is my uh, general take. Question from Andrew Viniecki, saying, Hi, Robert. It seems nonsensical to me that those who benefited from the death of Aerys refer to Jaime as Kingslayer with such discontent. It appears he did them a favour. Is it all honour focused? Thanks. Yes, it is all honour focused. And it's that people did benefit from Aerys dying. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Um, the manner in which he died, though, is not known to people. The fact that he was going to blow up King's Landing and Jaime stopped that from happening is not known to people. As far as the vast majority of the people in the Seven Kingdoms are aware, what happened was Tywin Lannister's army got into King's Landing, headed towards the Red Keep. Jaime saw this happening and killed the king so that the Lannisters could come in and take over. That is the story that everybody thinks is right. Jaime has never told them no. So everyone thinks that he didn't do it out of any kind of noble ideal. He did it because he's working on his, basically working for his father, working for Team Lannister, whereas he should have been um, there defending the king because that's what he'd vowed to do. Now, that line of thinking takes you to this point where actually Jaime didn't need to do it. From most people's perspective, they think, well, the city was being sacked. Aerys was going to get killed anyway. Jaime didn't need to do that. What he could have done is just stood to one side while the Lannister soldiers came in, as they were going to just a few hours later, and let them deal with it. And then, because he hadn't properly protected his king, probably he should have taken the black and gone up to the wall. So that's the kind of the feeling. Most people have no idea that he did this to stop Aerys from killing people. Most people think he did it for House Lannister. A question from Otter of Despair. Why didn't Tywin remarry and have more children to ensure the continuity of the house, given the situation? One of the biggest plot holes for me. Interesting. Yes. you would have to say that from a pure strategic perspective, Tywin should have remarried and had more children. However, um, there's a couple of things I think we have to say. First of all, House Lannister was stronger um, at that point than they ever had been. In his mind, he already had three children. One he didn't really care for, but he was actively around the time of his or after his wife's death. He was looking to be getting Jaime and Cersei married off very advantageously. He didn't he he didn't think, oh, there's not going to be any more Lannister descendants. Added to which, as I've already said, House Lannister is huge. There's lots of them. Even Ned notices quite how many Lannisters there are. He says something like, "What an incredibly fertile family the Lannisters are," or something along those lines. So there was no drive for him to have to do this for the sake of House Lannister. So, but the second point here is that he seems to although he comes across as just being this really cold, heartless man, we're told that around Joanna, he seemed to have been genuinely in love. She was the only person that could ever make him laugh. We're told that he ruled the Seven Kingdoms, but back home she was in charge. That this seems to have been a really strong and different relationship to any other relationship that he had. He seems to have been genuinely um, uh, destroyed inside by her death, uh, to the extent to which that he actively thought about killing Tyrion, who, yes, had been born deformed, but this was still his own child. He thought of actively killing him because it was that pregnancy and birth which killed his wife. So he felt really so. This is a hint to how much he loved his wife. So just another aspect of his character that we don't often see. Um, right, let's go to some questions, more questions from my patrons. Um, Sarah A. I always wondered if Titus Lannister, this is Tywin's dad, really was such a weak leader as Tywin claimed he was, or if he simply chose to build up his subordinates, knowing it would strengthen his region, and chose to build bonds on trust. We only hear about his weakness from Tywin or people strongly influenced by him, and seeing his judgment on others in the main series, he clearly lacks appreciation for any strengths he himself has not got. Magma Frost similarly says, "Hi, Robert. We hear from Tywin that his father was a weak lord, but what do we actually know about in what way this was the case? Given Tywin is, to put it politely, not a great person, should we believe his opinion of his father?" Um, so, yes, we shouldn't, or no, we shouldn't necessarily just agree with Tywin's view. But this wasn't just Tywin's view. This was the view of other people, and the relatively objective interpretation of what was going on at the time does seem to back this up to some degree. Now, Tywin seems to have put this even more strongly than we would, I suspect. But if you read The World of Ice and Fire, again, it's not independent, but it's scathing about him. And if even half of the things we're told are true, then probably he was weak. Now, I've mentioned a few of them already. Um, that some of his vassal lords asked for money uh, as loans and then refused to pay them back. And he just went, oh, well, whatever. This got so bad that just random merchants would pop into King's Landing and say, "Can I have some money, please?" And he wouldn't be able to refuse them, and they would have no intention of paying it back. They would literally just come to come to Castle Rock, request some money, get on a boat, and go away. This was quite tough, then people would be coming and they would start mocking him in his own hall. They would start mocking him, apparently. Now, those things could be exaggerated by Tywin or someone else, but what I think we can't really be explained away any other way is the fact that Aegon the Fifth. Maybe we will find this when we get to that bit of Dunk and Egg. Fingers crossed we ever do. Randomly, quick Dunk and Egg update. George R. R. Martin, on his Not a blog, he shared a video of the actor whose name I still can't remember, who was playing Egg, getting his head shaved, which I think shows quite how close they are to filming. We were told June was when they were going to be starting filming, and we've been told that they've cast a whole load of other key roles. We haven't seen them yet, but we've been told a lot of people have been cast now. And he did say that basically this has been commissioned for one season, so the Hedge Knight. Assuming it's a success, then the other two stories would be done, by which time he hopes, now interpret this however you wish, I'm just reporting what George R. R. Martin says, by which time he hopes that he will have written more Dunk and Egg stories. And then he puts in brackets, yes, after I finish The Winds of Winter. So what I think we can take from that for certain is the fact that George R. R. Martin's writing priorities at the moment, in terms of his sort of main world of Ice and Fire, is that he's going to be carrying on as he has been saying. His priority is The Winds of Winter. When he finishes that, he's not just going to go straight on to doing A Dream of Spring. He will do some more Dunk and Egg stories, and then presumably go on to A Dream of Spring. But that's the update from there, which was a digression away from a question about, oh yes, Tywin's dad, Titus. So, Aegon the Fifth, Egg, when he is king, 3 times he has to send in forces from King's Landing all the way over to the Westerlands to put down a revolt, because Titus himself could not do it. Now, once you'd say, fine, these things happen. But 3 times, I think, shows that this was a pattern. People felt that they could just ignore him and do what they want. So, was he weak? Well, I think we're definitely getting that filtered through Tywin's perspective. He sounds like he was a nice guy. He sounds in many ways a bit like Viserys the First is described in Fire and Blood. Paddy Considine did bring out a huge extra amount of layers in House of the Dragon, but on the page, he does seem to just be somebody who just enjoys spending time with his family, hates confrontation. It's just that he was surrounded by some competent administrators in the way that Titus appears not to have been. Toothless Paste saying, a nice guy but a bad lord. Yeah, that seems to be roughly the feel that we've got going on here. Question from Cookie Tywin. Geryon Lannister. This is the youngest brother of Tywin. Did he perish upon the sea by storm or pirates? Did he make it to Valyria and find his end there? Or is he lingering still in the wilds of Essos and perhaps ventured further than anyone expected and is living like a prince in some far-off land? What do you suppose? I hope there is some obscure mention of Geryon in Tyrion's time in the East. Also, I think, please correct me, timing could have lined up for Geryon to be the sailor's wife's true husband had the 5-year jump happened. I wonder if it's a happy coincidence that it's become a fan favourite theory that the sailor's wife is Tisha. It's one Lannister or another, it seems. Okay, so a few different elements here. Geryon. Geryon was the youngest brother of Tywin, uncle, therefore, to Tyrion, Jaime, and Cersei, and both Jaime and Tyrion remarked that he was their favourite uncle. he seems to have been a lot more light-hearted than his siblings, it has to be said. They all seem to have reacted differently to their father, and then how their elder brother Tywin had sort of reacted and acted as a lord. And uh, what Geryon seems to have done is dote upon the children and have adventures. And one of those adventures that he decided to go on was to Old Valyria. Now, why to Old Valyria? Well, first of all, because it's there, I suspect. But secondly, the Lannisters, as we have noted, do not have a Valyrian steel sword. They used to. It was called Bright Raw. They got it at some point in the century before the Doom of Valyria. However, it did not last very long, probably only for 100 years or so, because in the aftermath of the Doom of Valyria, um, I think it was King Tommen II, um, so this is before the Targaryen invasion, headed over to Old Valyria to try and get what he thought would be whatever riches and magic plunder that could be found. A lot of people had this idea: let's go to where old Valyria was. Now that all of that volcanic stuff's died down, we must be able to go and grab something from there that's going to be quite valuable. He headed off with Brightraw, the sword, and was never seen from again. So Geryon headed off to Old Valyria on the same sort of mission, but also to be looking for the Lannister sword. Um, and he never returned. What we're told about him is that he got as far as Volantis, and at which point told his crew, "Hey, we're going on to Valyria," and they said, "Well, you may be, we're not." So at that point, he then had to hire slaves to take him there, and presumably he then headed off, and again was never seen from again. Might he have just decided to peace out and go somewhere else? I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but I personally see no reason to doubt that he um, went on to Old Valyria and to the Smoking Sea and just didn't return like everybody else before him. Um, in terms of the sailor's wife, now this is a fascinating, a minor character, a book-only character in Bravos. She runs this brothel called, I think it's called the Happy Port, and has done for some time. Sam and Arya both find themselves there for various reasons, not the reasons that most people go there for, it has to be said. But this is run by the sailor's wife. Now, who is the sailor's wife? Well, we don't know huge amounts about her, but she seems like quite the character. That she runs things slightly differently for herself. She speaks perfect common tongue, apparently. And she insists that any of her clients must first marry her, um, pay her a marriage price before they can sleep with her, basically. Now, she has a daughter by the name of Lana, who has blonde hair, very blonde hair. Now, this has led to wild speculation because George R. Martin is clearly highlighting this person. What might this mean? Well, Lana obviously hints there of Lannister. The golden hair also hints of Lannister, and the fact that this person seems to have some kind of trauma surrounding marriage, or if not trauma, then um, certainly some kind of real focus on "I want to be married." She claims that she had been married and her husband had sailed off and would one day return. However, other people say that he died. So, could this be Geryon? Possibly. I think one of the other possibilities that people have come up with is that maybe this is Tisha, Tyrion's first wife. Now, what we're told there is that there's a very traumatic backstory. I won't go into it all, but basically, Tywin does horrendous things to her, but gives her some money and sends her away. What does that mean? Well, presumably, as judged by Lannisport, in a boat, just go away. Where might she end up? Braavos seems a reasonable place for her to end up. And then, if she had a child, then maybe she might, who has golden hair, maybe she might call her Lana. The timing there does work out pretty well. So, is it? Well, George R. Martin intriguingly he was asked many years ago when he used to answer questions like this. He was asked, "Where do whores go?" Which is the question. So Tyrion, just before he kills his father, he said, basically, he says, what did you do with her? Where did Tisha go?" And Tywin goes, "I don't know. Wherever whores go." And that phrase keeps running through Tyrion's mind. We're supposed to be thinking about it. And George R. R. Martin was asked directly, "Where do whores go? Will we find out?" And George R. R. Martin said, "We will." So this is going to get resolved one way or another. So for me, if I had to guess, it's far more likely that that is what is going on than Geryon. But I do like the idea of Geryon. The Lannister link, I think, is clearly meant. It's clearly quite strong there. Username redacted. What has House Lannister's relationship with the Iron Bank been historically? Outside of their debts, they were cooperative. Were they cooperative rivals or had some other form of business relation in the past? Lannister gold is very influential. It is. We're not told of any huge links, it has to be said. And the Iron Bank, although it has been around for a few hundred years, it's not been around for as long as the Lannisters and their gold have been around. So I think the short answer is that the Lannisters, they didn't need to borrow from the Iron Bank, nor incidentally did they need to put their money into the Iron Bank for safekeeping, because they had a massive rock. It was basically the Iron Bank keep their the money, their deposits, in a cave. Basically, it's very secure cave, but in a cave. That's exactly what the Lannisters basically do. They've got their own cave system. So I don't think there's any extra advantage for them to do that. There is the one link we know in the Dance of the Dragons where Tyrion Lannister sends a quarter of the crown's money over to Braavos to the Iron Bank. But beyond that, no, there's not. The Lannisters haven't needed to get the money from them. So the bank haven't been coming after them, nor have they been setting up rival massive banks. So there's not really been a sort of a threat. Yes, obviously they're running their own money system, but it's not on such a big scale that this is going to threaten the monopoly of the Iron Bank. Darius Hutchinson, could dragonfire and/or water cause the rock to become unlivable in a similar way to the rains or Harrenhal caused by Dany and Tyrion? So dragonfire is an interesting one because we do get, I think it's Visenya who actively ponders the Lannisters during the invasion. She ponders what the Lannisters did, because the Lannisters came out. They formed this army with the Gardeners and took on the Targaryen army and lost to the dragons. But what if they stayed in the rock? And as I say, I think it's Visenya comes to the conclusion that probably that would have withstood dragonfire. because it is just so massive. So could Dragonfire, and those dragons are a lot older, and their Dragonfire is a lot hotter than the dragons that we have in A Song of Ice and Fire. Incidentally, George R. R. Martin has actually said that we often think of the Eyrie, perhaps, or Storm's End as being impregnable. That's definitely a word used for the Eyrie. No one can get us here. George R. R. Martin has said that probably Casterly Rock is the most secure and impregnable fortress in the Seven Kingdoms. So, for all of the claims of the other places, it's probably the most secure place. So, not Dragonfire. Water. Could it? So with the rains, there was a lake which basically went downhill and into where the rains lived. This is, I think, a matter of pure gravity. Yes, in theory, if you had enough water, you could probably wash out Casterly Rock. But Casterly Rock is so high. As I say, it's 3 times the height of the wall. This is massively tall. It's massively big inside. It's miles from end to end. You need a huge amount of water, and you need to have it above Casterly Rock. So I think, practically speaking, no is the answer. It is pretty hard to get at. Nate Davis, was Lannister money directly or indirectly responsible for the doom of Valyria? Yes. I have got a question on this somewhere, which I would like to. I had a quote from it. Okay, I will just talk about this now, and then I'll sort of wrap up that other question when I get to it. So I've done a video on this if you want the full theory, but there appears to have been prophecies. Septon Barth found these in some ancient scrolls that the Valyrians, their prophets, priests, had prophecies that their doom would be caused by Lannister gold or Casterly Rock gold. Now, this is why, although the Valyrians, we're told, greedily sought out precious metals, stones, things like that, so they really liked gold, they always refused to make a sword, a Valyrian steel sword, for the Lannisters. So, and these are things that we know. We'll get onto this. It's not speculation. It's sort of in informed theorizing. Let's call it that. So we know that there was some kind of prophecy, and that this that was about Lannister gold causing their doom. We know that as a result of that, even though they actively loved gold, they avoided Lannister gold, which meant that they refused to sell a Valyrian steel sword to them. We know that the Lannisters, regardless of this, got a Valyrian steel sword, and we know they paid for it because we're told that what they paid for it was enough money to raise an army. So a huge amount of money, a huge amount of Lannister gold. Those things we know. We also know that the faceless men basically claim it, that they brought death to the masters. Now, some people say that this must be because the faceless men were slaves, and they just wanted to get rid of the masters who'd been so horrible to them in the past. Arya puts that very point to the kindly man and basically says you should be killing the masters because, and it's like, no, his response is basically, no, you're missing the point. This isn't about who deserves to die. Your whole idea, Arya, and her kill list is all about who deserves to die. It's nothing about that. Everybody, all men must die. It's about whose turn is it? Who gets paid, as an offering to the gods for death? Who calls out for death? Those are the things that the faceless men actually care about, not making moral judgments about who deserves to die. So the faceless men, if we take everything at its face value, the faceless men actually did the deed. Somebody must have paid them somewhere. There's a legend, a prophecy that Lannister gold is going to cause the doom. I think this is a fair next logical step to say, okay, so the Lannister gold was what paid the faceless men to do this. Where's this Lannister gold coming from? Did the Lannisters do it? I don't think the Lannisters did it. So what's the missing piece in this line of logic? Who had the ability to smith and make Valyrian steel swords? Who had that knowledge and ability that the Lannisters could pay, who also might have a motive to be causing the doom of Valyria, the destruction of the dragons and the Valyrians? And I think that the answer to that is the Maesters. They fit both of this. We know that they know how to be smithing with Valyrian steel. It's never explicitly said that, but they're forging links on the chain. They do that. They do forge things in a particular way. They've got, therefore, because they've got hundreds of years of forging Valyrian steel links, they, by implication, have a stockpile of Valyrian steel or the ingredients to make Valyrian steel or something along those lines somewhere hidden in Old Town. Where might the Lannisters have gone? They can't get them from the source. No one else is selling them one, so they might get one made by the Maesters. The Maesters suddenly have a huge amount of money, Lannister gold, and we know who killed the dragons the first time around, asks Marwyn. The Maesters. So do we know this? No, we do not know this, but all of the building blocks of that, for me, fit together really nicely. And the answer to your question, was Lannister money directly or indirectly responsible for the doom of Valyria? Yes. Andrew Cage is confirming, yes, it was Visenya who was doing that, thinking about the Lannisters. What if the Lannisters just stayed in Casterly Rock? Steve Ashlerner Turner saying, what if Ned's brother was betrothed to Cersei and not Lady Cat? How big a difference to the basic story? Let's work through this one. So I assume you're talking about Brandon, the Ned's older brother, who had been engaged to Catelyn Tully as she was then. What if he had instead been engaged to Cersei? Would that have made a difference? Well, I think the point is that he wouldn't have been, because the alliances were being built very clearly and strongly, and although the Lannisters were potentially being drawn into it through a marriage between Jaime and Lysa, that doesn't seem to be a way that the Starks were going forward. But how would that have? I mean, that would have affected where he was. I mean, with all of these things, the butterfly effect starts to get quite big quite early on. If we assume that everything else just sort of pans out normally, after the tourney at Harrenhal, he goes to his bride-to-be's father's castle and hangs out for a bit, that being Riverrun, waiting for his father to come down for the wedding. Now, I think it's probably fair to say if that wedding was going to be with uh, Cersei, then he would have gone all the way down to Casterly Rock to hang out for a bit down there. Um, him being in Riverrun meant that he was quite close by when the whole Rhaegar and Lyanna thing happened, which meant that he could then charge down to King's Landing to be confronting Rhaegar. Um, I did theorize a while ago. I'm not going to go into all of the thinking behind this. I think that he ran into Littlefinger, and Littlefinger told him something which prompted him to be going down there. I think all of that iteration of events would not therefore have happened. Rhaegar and Lyanna would have eloped, but the march to war would have been a lot slower. We wouldn't have had Brandon heading down to King's Landing, being killed by the Mad King, Rickard being killed by the Mad King, the demand for Ned and Robert Baratheon to be handed over, which ultimately was the thing which led to the war. Those things might well have happened, but on a much slower basis. And the key thing, George R. R. Martin is a little bit vague on exact dates around this period for understandable reasons, but the key thing to note is that Rhaegar and Lyanna, there's probably every reason to believe that by the time they got to the Tower of Joy, whichever route they went, they certainly weren't going by sort of main routes via King's Landing or anywhere like that. By the time they got there and found out what was going on, it was already too late. The continent had descended into civil war already. So that could well have been stopped. And so that once you get to that, you get to well, what happens now? Robert Baratheon would still be mad, but would Ned have been on his side if Lyanna is very clearly not wanted to be marrying him? At that point, we start entering what if on a much bigger scale. But I think the short answer is that the start of the war would have been very different. Andrew Case saying, I wonder if the Iron Bank and or Braavosi top brass could have been part of the Doom conspiracy as well. Valyria was a massive obstacle for Braavosi expansion. Yes, absolutely. So the Braavos as an institution definitely did have a grudge against the Valyrians. The first law of Braavos is anti-slavery, and the Valyrians had their slaves, so that's entirely possible that they were part of it. I think the difference is the faceless men per se did not have the grudge against the Valyrian freehold. Let's go to Ranabir Mitra saying regarding Geryon Lannister. So this is back with Tyrion, Jaime Cersei's uncle Geryon. I recently uncovered drafts of A Feast for Crows, A Dance with Dragons that seem to suggest that Tyrion was due to actually meet the Shrouded Lord, the Grey Grace. How much do you, and that's in the Sorrows, I'll get onto that, what that is if you're not sure in just one second. How do you align with the popular fandom theory that his Grey Grace is actually Geryon Lannister post-contracting grayscale? George R. R. Martin did confirm that he ripped out this chapter from the official books, but he did say that it was due to be a swell, spooky, and evocative chapter. If not the above theory, what is your favourite theory about the Shrouded Lord, and why potentially it would be Tyrion who would finally make him laugh? Okay, so in the books, Tyrion, when we get to A Dance with Dragons, he starts off in Pentos in Illyrio Mapatis's manse, and then he gets on the Shy Maid, this boat heading down the River Royne. It's a fantastic little section of the story. He's there surrounded by this wonderfully interesting cast of characters, and he slowly starts figuring out who they are. He starts figuring out, hang on, that's John Connington. Hang on, that person over there is person claiming to be Aegon the Sixth. He starts working through figuring out who all of these people are. During that journey, they go through what is known as Sorrows. We sort of get it very briefly in Echo and the TV show, but it's much more central in the book. This is where the Rhoynar, one of the centers of the Rhoynar, the Rhoynish culture, before they, the remnants of them head over to Dorne. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole history of this, but basically they have a huge battle against the Valyrian freehold, and they lose. The Valyrians win. However, they give a very strong account of themselves and summon up some Prince Garin, who sort of heads them up at this point. He gets captured, and as a last gasp, a bit of magic, he summons the River Rhoyne water magic to be taking out as many Valyrians as possible. The rivers rise, the fog sets in, Valyrians die, dragons die. It's all very dramatic, but the place is then cursed. The Sorrows. This is where, and this is where grayscale seems to sort of be, it would say, the epicenter of grayscale. This is where stone men are. So if you contract grayscale, you head to the Sorrows to see out your days there. It's very eerie. It's very spooky as a place. Now, the chapter we have is it's a great chapter already. They head through there. There's something that often get asked the question about exactly what happens. The boat seems to travel past a bridge and then travel past the same bridge again. Very deliberate. This isn't some mistake by George R. Martin. There's clearly something weird going on here. Stone men attack the boat. We get concerned. John Connington contracts grayscale. Tyrion's there being dragged in. It's all very dramatic. But there is an extra chapter that George R. R. Martin wrote. He's talked about this a couple of times. And in that, it's basically Tyrion's adventures in the Sorrows. He sort of gets captured. He meets the Shrouded Lord. And eventually, George R. Martin decided, although he really enjoyed the chapter, it did not fit. The implication is that this takes Tyrion down a very kind of magical path, which was not where he was wanting for the character to be going at that time. It distracted away from the main thing that was going on with him, which is traveling down the Rhoyne to eventually end up over in Meereen. This was not actually helping the flow of the story, and he's rather teasingly said so. He's got that chapter printed out, and it's in a desk drawer somewhere. And as long as he lives, nobody's going to be able to read it. But one day after he dies, perhaps we may get to see what was in that chapter. Now, this has led to huge amounts of speculation about what might have happened in that chapter, but also the nature of this Shrouded Lord, who seems to be the leader of the Stone Men. Who could this be? There are lots of legends and rumors about this person, and he's apparently you will get a boon, a gift, if you can make the Shrouded Lord laugh. Some people have said, oh, maybe this could be Gerion. Maybe Tyrion could be meeting Gerion and making him laugh. And I see no evidence for it. I love it as an idea. I see no evidence for it. I want this to be in world. This is very much a Rhoynish place. I would love this to be Prince Garin or a descendant of Prince Garin who is there still. That would really work for me. But I mean, I don't know. It's such a weird place, and George R. Martin has deliberately shown it to us and then moved us on. So he doesn't want us to know. It's a distraction away from the main story. So maybe one day we'll find out, but we'll never know. Alex Bryce saying, hello, Robert. This is my first time asking a question as a patron. Well, welcome. This is actually, and I'll use this actually, good opportunity. Patrons, thank you. I always thank you on my live streams, because I cannot do what I do without your support. So I hugely appreciate it. If you do want to support this channel, Patreon is the best way to do that. All my patrons get a chance to submit questions for these live streams. just as a way of saying thank you. So yeah, there'll be a link down in the description, or if you're watching live, wherever the live chat is. So Alex says, I'm curious about Tywin, and more specifically what he does behind closed doors. It is suggested that he built the secret tunnel from the brothel to the Tower of the Hand. Surely if Tywin was prolific enough to build a secret sex tunnel, that other people would be aware of his habits. You'd think that the women might mention it. At the very least, Varys would know, considering his knowledge of the secret tunnel. How do you think Tywin kept it quiet or made it so that we heard no rumours of it? Phelan Walker also saying, I'm reading A Clash of Kings and just finished a Tyrion chapter where he visits this brothel with a secret tunnel. Varys mentions a previous Hand of the King dug it in order to visit the brothel in secret. Do you think it was Tywin Lannister? If not Tywin, do you have any thoughts as to who else it might have been? Jon Arryn seems unlikely. So what's going on? Well, we get this is Varys trying to ingratiate himself with Tyrion, and it's so Shay, his lover, he gets put out in the city, and Varys shows him there via this secret tunnel from the Tower of the Hand, which takes him to Chataya's, this brothel, out in the city. And Tyrion, understandably, sort of says, "So, how long's this been here? Who made this?" And Varys says, and I quote, "The tunnel was dug for another king's hand, whose honor would not allow him to enter such a house openly. Chitaya has closely guarded the knowledge of its existence." So we're not told which king, which hand, only that this hand, his honor would not allow him to openly go there. Now, the implication is that this has to be a hand who was there for more than just a few months, to have an entire tunnel built out from the Red Keep all the way out into the city. It seems to be somebody who was probably a hand there for a little while, and has their own reasons for not wishing to be seen to do it. So why do people think this is Tywin? Well, I mean, part of it is because this would bring some delicious irony to his public positions, that he was constantly having at Tyrion for "do not bring that whore to King's Landing" and things like that. He very publicly shamed the woman that his father had been sleeping with. Afterwards, he certainly gave the impression that he, after his wife's death, then he never remarried and never looked at another woman again. However, we discover in secret that he has Shay in his bed when Tyrion goes and ends up killing him. So clearly he does lead this double life. There are double standards there. There are hints that we can kind of try to dig into the psychology of this. Part of what it is that he dislikes about Tyrion is probably he sees a little bit of himself in Tyrion. Something that he probably doesn't like about himself, something that he doesn't want people to see, but it is there. So that's why people like this idea. Added to the fact that the tunnel, we don't know which hand it was, but Tywin definitely was hand for a long time. He was hand for another king. Chitaya, we're just told about Chitaya. We weren't told that this was built here before Chitaya's time. So if it was, then that seriously cuts down the potential for which hands it could be. And then there are they could be hints by George R. R. Martin. When Tyrion emerges, he emerges behind some stained glass, which are red and yellow patterned. Red and yellow are obviously the Lannister colours. Does that mean it is the Lannisters? I don't know. And there is one of the women who works there very clearly has been described as having golden hair and green eyes, which is very much Lannister coloring. So could this be a love child? It's there's no actual 100% proof, but I like this idea that this is Tywin secretly. Um, uh, Varys wouldn't give up the secret. Of course, he wouldn't. There would be no reason for him to. Chitaya definitely wouldn't want to be giving up the secret because having a secret tunnel into the Red Keep is not the kind of thing that you'd want people to be aware of. So that would have been kept. And as for the people who actually did the tunneling, I think that Tywin is the kind of person who could brutally just, in the same way that, say, Maegor the Cruel killed all the people who built the tunnels originally, you could certainly imagine how Tywin might have just covered his own tracks, so to speak. Derry's read it before, pointing out that the tunnel Tyrion uses at Chitaya's is used as a departure point only. It isn't the one from the Handstout. Yeah, useful clarification, but I think the point still stands. It was built as Varys says, it was dug for another king's hand, whose honor would not allow him to enter such a house openly. So that's the key point we've got going on here. Um, Samantha Drake saying, hello from Oklahoma. Do you think the great performances in the TV show will change or influence the fate of the three siblings in the book? No, I don't. I don't think so. The So if you're referring to the great performances for Jaime, Cersei, and Tyrion, I mean, I would agree. They all of those actors did a fantastic job. Uh, the I don't think. Um, I mean, with a couple of minor exceptions, I don't think that there's anything that happened on the TV show which will influence the book. George R. R. Martin has consistently said um, that his book is different to the TV show. The only, as I say, a couple of possible exceptions. I think that um, he did a very long time ago. He did mention Osha, the character of Osha, who he felt was very well portrayed on the TV show and added extra elements to the character. He said the same for Shay, but I think because Osha is still alive in the books, I do wonder whether we will get a little bit more about Osha as a result of that. That he seemed to, when he was talking about it, he seemed to very much be, oh yes, so this is great. This is extra element, extra layers of character going on there. Um, but generally speaking, no, I don't think that George R. R. Martin is going to uh, use the TV show to be influencing. His position, incidentally, I mean, it's been a while since he's done this, but um, when he last addressed these kind of things in his blog, then what he was at pains to point out is that the book can't end the same as the TV show because there are characters in the TV show who died that are still alive in the books. There are lots of big characters and massive plot lines in the books that aren't on the TV show. It's not just a matter of is he going to do the same thing that happened on the TV show? That's not even on the table because to take one example, because we were talking about it a little bit earlier, on the TV show, Dany arrives and faces Cersei in King's Landing. What that completely leaves the whole issue of Fagon's invasion, which is going to be there first. They kind of merged that into what was going on. The Golden Company were then working for Cersei. That is going to be completely different. And Dany's approach to how does she deal with somebody claiming to be a fellow Targaryen is going to be incredibly different to how she would deal with somebody who was just a Lannister. James Boros. I've had this weird counterfactual in my head for a long time, but never articulated. What if, by some strange twist of fate, Tyrion was fostered at Winterfell under Ned? What would that Tyrion be like? Uh, well, I mean, these what ifs I always find quite hard because it's what what would Tyrion at Winterfell be like? I mean, fundamentally, he would be the same person. He would still be intelligent. He would still be strategic. Um, he would um, probably still use his wits to be getting himself out of situations. I dare say that he probably still would have uh, frequented the Wintertown brothels in the way that he did brothels in other parts of the country. Um, what might be different, though, is the when we meet him, he has this armor up. He gives John this speech. You'll remember it well about never forget who you are, uh, because the world won't, use this as armor. That comes from the attitude that had been surrounding him all his when he was being brought up. Um, would Winterfell have been a more supportive environment? Probably, probably. And so I think you would seen a less sort of battle weary Tyrion, so to speak. But fundamentally, I think he would have been the same character. Um, Jackie C saying it didn't do Theon much good. Um, it, it did while he was there. So I think that this is the point, and I'm glad you raised Theon because Theon, um, he's not a nice guy when he's up in Winterfell by any stretch of the imagination. First time around, and he's a clearly nasty guy the second time around. But he's softened compared to what he is when he goes back and meets his father and his family over in Pike. Then he feels he has to prove himself, and that is what drives him to be starting to do the things that he does. Um, so actually, while he was at Winterfell, he was arrogant. He was not a pleasant person to be around, but a lot of the harshest edges weren't there. Um, that Alf Torrent just saying, actually, Theon was a very confused young boy looking for validation from the man he felt threw him away. Yeah, I think that's really interesting and good point. Rustler saying, good day, Robert. What was Tywin's plan for getting Jaime out of the Kingsguard if the War of the Five Kings hadn't happened? He doesn't seem to do anything towards this end in the years between Robert's rebellion and the first book, yet seems certain Jaime will be his heir. Yet this is again a really interesting observation. So Tywin is very clear. Jaime is going to be his heir. Um, he doesn't want Tyrion to inherit, and yet just before Robert's rebellion, Jaime becomes a member of the Kingsguard, and that means that he can't inherit. So, what's the plan? Well, for 15 years or so, Jaime is just a member of the Kingsguard, and as you say, Tywin appears to do very little. Um, I I think, however, this is more biding his time than not doing anything. I think that he realized, as Cersei did, that Robert Baratheon's rule was not going to last forever. The as Ned was kind of came to the conclusion is that um, when Robert died, um, it wasn't murder per se. They'd fed him a lot of strong wine, and he was out on a hunt and made it very dangerous. Nothing might have happened that time. He might have just gone out and done his hunting or fallen asleep rather than gone hunting. Nothing might have happened that time. But the next time something could have happened, it would have been um, something at some point. And what Tywin was doing was strengthening the Lannister grip on King's Landing, which meant that the moment that Robert Baratheon was gone, uh, Joffrey took over as king. Um, who was being regent? Cersei was being regent. At this moment in time, he uh, could uh, just get Jaime released from his vows. I think it's as simple as that. Is that at some point Robert's reign would end, and when that happened, uh, the Lannisters were in control, and that was the plan. We do see a sort of a start of a plan when Jaime returns um, down to King's Landing. He has the it's in A Storm of Swords. There's some fantastic Jaime chapters when he arrives back at King's Landing, and he's been thinking all this time, I'm going to go back and it's going to be a bit like it was before. But then chapter after chapter, bits of what he perhaps was hoping for or expecting just get chipped away. Obviously, he loses his hand. Um, he arrives back to find that the Kingsguard has all been changed. So it's not the people that he knew, it's a whole load of extra people that he doesn't really like, didn't appoint himself. Um, the relationship with Cersei takes a kind of a downward spiral. And then he's faced with his father, who does basically try and order him to leave the Kingsguard. He basically says, okay, so you now need to go back to Castle Rock, become my heir. Um, he even says, so you should take Tommen with you. He can be your squire. Marjorie Tyrell, you should marry Marjorie Tyrell. He's got this whole idea plotted out in his mind about what he's going to do. Now, that clearly was um, the situation at the time, wasn't always going to be the plan, but it shows that Tywin had been considering this possibility all along. The moment that his grandchild was on the throne and Jaime was back, that's what he could do. He could say, right, here's the plan. You're now quitting the Kingsguard. Um, Cookie Tywin saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day to you. I was wondering, what do you think has happened, or what do you think happened to little Tyrek Lannister after the riot in King's Landing? I've always figured, since nobody has ever been found, and that as Lannisters are dropping like flies, perhaps Varys has spirited the kid away and is holding him for after Fagon's arrival." In that, on the return of this Dragon King, Varys can pull an heir to the rock out of his pocket and has a great Lord of the West to bend the knee. Rassler also says there's a theory that Varys may have been responsible for Lannister's disappearance. If true, what need would he have for the boy? And do you think Tyrek Lannister will reappear in the story? Okay, so this is the riot that happens in King's Landing when Myrcella gets sent down, put on a boat and sent to Dorne. The great and the good from the Red Keep go down to the docks to say goodbye. Then they head back up to the Red Keep. The people are disgruntled, not actually by the procession and the Myrcella going. It's more the fact that they've not got much food, because Stannis has blockaded King's Landing, and here's all of these clearly very well-fed nobles who are here. The people are angry, and there's a riot. It starts out um, relatively quietly, but escalates quite quickly. A woman, I think, holding a baby, steps in front of the um, Sansa and Joffrey. basically, and clearly is demanding food. Sansa seems to have some sort of pity, says, we should give her some money. So they throw some money, but some silver coins, but she doesn't react to that. At which point, a whole bunch of people see these silver coins on the floor and just suddenly starts scrabbling around for them. Um, uh, this prevents them getting back up to the Red Keep even more. Joffrey starts getting angry. Somebody starts throwing something at Joffrey. Somebody lays a hand on him. The Kingsguard start getting involved. It escalates very quickly. People do get back up to King's Landing, but a lot of people are lost along the way, and some of them. High Septon is lost. Lolly Stokeworth has terrible things happen to her. There's a few other minor named characters who die or disappear, and Sansa gets dragged off and has to be rescued by the Hound. And it's all a little bit, you know, who knows exactly what's going on. They have to spend some time trying to figure out, is everyone here? What happened when they get back? And it turns out Tyrek Lannister has gone missing during this scuffle riot, which spreads out across the city. Now, who is Tyrek? He is a cousin to the Lannisters that we know. So he is the son of Tyget Lannister, who is the third of four brothers, Tywin's younger brother. Now, he is a character who we sort of see on the fringes of the action. He's one of Robert Baratheon's squires, along with Lancel Lannister. As a part of the Lannisters trying to grab hold of the Riverlands, then they marry quite a few of their own to Riverland lordly families. Um, uh, this is one of them. So we get Tyrek married to name escapes me, but one of the minor lordly families in the Riverlands, and actually he has to marry because it's the only option they have. He has to marry a baby, like a 1-year-old. Everybody mocks him for it, and but he disappears. And that's it. He's gone. They send out search parties. They don't find a body. They don't find anything. Now, what's going on? It's a mystery. It's not one of the massive mysteries that our attention's drawn to, but it's just okay. We don't know what happened to him. We don't know where he is. Now, this is going to be one of those things where, first of all, I'll set out the boring, most likely answer, and then I'll address this other possibility, which is it's just a real possibility. But first, the boring answer. The boring answer is this was a riot. People disappear in riots. He will have been wearing rich clothing. People will have grabbed him, taken sort of jewelry and valuables off of him. Maybe he got killed and they had to dispose of the body. This is not there's no need for a big surprise here. There's no need for a conspiracy theory. It's just a thing which could have happened. It's a riot. People go missing in riots in King's Landing. So that's the boring answer and the most likely answer. However, Jaime thinks to himself, and Jaime's quite a clever guy, quite insightful sometimes. He thinks, so Varys didn't have he didn't come down to see off Myrcella. He wasn't involved there, so he stayed back. He surely would have known that there's a possibility of a riot, and yet he didn't warn anyone of it. So that's a little bit suspicious. And what we've got here is one of Robert Baratheon's squires. The other was Lancel. He he would have known stuff. He would have seen things. He almost certainly would have, if not been involved in the plot to be getting Robert Baratheon drunk and by implication putting him in danger that might kill him on that hunt, then he will have seen it happen. He will have seen the way that Lancel kept on feeding the king extra strong wine. So he will have been aware of that. He might even have been aware of the king's nocturnal habits and things like that. So he will have known stuff. And Jaime thinks so. Varys maybe he took the opportunity and got him for the information he had. That's Jaime's thought. Now, the extra layer we've got going on here is that Varys obviously is not just that Jaime doesn't know what Varys's big game is, but we've got an idea. We've got an inkling of what his big plan is. And at a very high level, Varys is working with Illyrio to be trying to bring Aegon the VI, to power in King's Landing. Illyrio is in charge of everything that happens over in Essos. Varys is in charge of everything that happens over in Westeros. And the most obvious thing that he is doing is weakening King's Landing. So I did a video quite recently which basically says if you read between the lines, he's the person who managed to subtly influence to get Sir Barristan out of the way. Tyrion, he clearly takes him out of King's Landing and up to Illyrio. He gets rid of Kevan Lannister in the epilogue to A Dance with Dragons. He kills him and says explicitly to him as he is dying, it's only because you are being competent and you are helping the make King's Landing's defenses strong again. So he is very clearly trying to weaken King's Landing and weaken the Seven Kingdoms. We overhear a conversation. Allowing the country to be at war so that it's weak and is able to fall when Aegon's invasion, Aegon the VI invasion happens. But there's another element to all of this that we haven't really seen, but surely must be going on, which is that Varys and Illyrio don't just want their man to be king of King's Landing. They want him to be king of the Seven Kingdoms, which means that he has to have support from outside of King's Landing. Other parts of the Seven Kingdoms have to come on board. Now, we're getting hints about how we might expect to see Dawn come on board. The Arianne plotline is very likely to be heading in that direction. But what about the Lannisters? Does Varys want to tame Lannister? That he can he is quite low down in the order of succession, but as you say, the Lannisters are starting to fall very quickly. Jaime is still a member of the Kingsguard; he's not in the succession anymore. Tyrion is basically out of the line of succession as well. He's been sentenced to death. Joffrey's gone. Kevan Lannister's gone. The list of heirs is starting to grow thin. So actually, getting someone like Tyrek could make some sense. Now, do we have any evidence that this is what's going on? No, nothing other than the sort of the. Could Varys have done it? Yeah. Is it a bit mildly suspicious that he wasn't there when the riot happened and he didn't warn anyone that it might happen? Yeah. Would it make sense for him to do it? Yeah. But we haven't got any smoking gun. We haven't got any conversations where he talks about his Lannister prisoner. We haven't got any hints that he was out there ordering people to capture him. We've got nothing like that. So it's possible, but the boring answer is probably still more likely. Right. Maura Lee. In A Dance with Dragons, Kevin Lannister is murdered by Varys, who hopes suspicion will fall on Highgarden and House Tyrell. Given the fact that Fagon will soon be coming to King's Landing, will Cersei want to risk war with House Tyrell given this new problem? I would think in order to protect her son Tommen's throne, Cersei will need all the help she can get to defend her son's throne from Fagon. What do you think? I think you're talking absolute sense, and I think that makes a complete logical sense. However, Cersei is not being at all logical at the moment. So, um, uh, she, if you're reading through A Feast for Crows, when we get introduced to Cersei's POV, you just see again and again how she thinks that she really clever and figure is doing all of the right strategic things, but again and again she is ignoring the important matters, focusing in on the minutiae and things that really don't matter at all, and being incredibly paranoid and seeking ways to be killing off her enemies. So if she thinks that House Tyrell murdered her uncle, she will immediately try and get revenge on them. The fact that there's an army 2 weeks march away from King's Landing, that's not really going to cross her mind. She'll think the priority is dealing with the enemy within King's Landing first, or something along those lines, and she'll be very proud of herself for how she does it. If she does do something equivalent to blowing up the Great Sept, she'll think that she's very clever in she gets rid of the Marjorie, the Tyrells, and the High Septon all at the same time. Well done, her. And she won't for one second think, what might this mean for the small folk? That might they now turn on me? Might they not like me because of blowing up the Great Sept? Bits of falling masonry everywhere, explosion all across the piece. So many people will die just because they happen to be there. Okay, let's go to a question from Sir Friend saying, hope all's well, Robert. New patron and first live stream contribution. Welcome. Through A Song of Ice and Fire, pretty much all the major houses have had some betrayal or political playing from their lower tier houses. Karstark's Freys, the Baratheon brothers dividing the Reach, Stormland families, Lord's Declarant shenanigans, etc. Other than the minor Westerling issue, which worked out for them anyway, the Lannisters have avoided this. How do you see the Lannisters being impacted by potential game playing or betrayals from now on? Interesting. Yes. So we did get the Westerlings. I mean, it did, as you say, work out all right for them in House Lannister in the end, but we haven't, as I said earlier, we haven't seen all of the detail of how the politics in the Westlands works. We have not been there with the POV yet. We do not understand. There may well be some houses who are not happy with how the Lannisters are playing this. It's entirely possible. There may well be some houses who got a little bit upset that Robb Stark could come in with an army into the Westlands. Then, from their perspective, the Lannisters couldn't even protect us from them attacking us in our own heartlands. It's possible that there are some disgruntled families there already. When we might see this, though, is, and my theory for how we're going to see Castle Rock, which George R. Martin tells us that we will, is through Cersei's POV. Now, I can see, if we roughly map out what's going to happen in King's Landing, Cersei will react to the murder of Kevin Lannister. She will try and take on the Tyrells and the Faith. The people will almost certainly turn on her. Fagon will arrive with the Golden Company and perhaps additional support, and I think she is going to be forced from the city. Where does she run to? The only place she would run to, I think, is Casterly Rock. That's where she will feel safe. That's her home. That's where she's going to go to. When she gets there, then then we might see some of the opposition. Now, it's a lot further into the future, but the possibility of her linking up with Euron is there. This did happen, obviously, on the TV show. The possibility that she might find him as an ally. She's looking for allies, and she sees the Greyjoys there who are attacking. Let's not forget they are currently attacking the Reach, the heartlands of the Tyrells. So she might well see that. And Euron is the kind of person who could very well cause some Westerlands households to turn against the Lannisters. So if it happens, I could see it happening towards the end of the Winds of Winter or into A Dream of Spring. The King's Road, saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day to you. Why did those mean washerwomen shrink poor Cersei's dresses?" George R. R. Martin uses this section to satirize power and show how bewildered Cersei is becoming. But is there any chance that someone like Varys could have had the dresses shrunk to make Cersei paranoid? This is do not worry if you missed this, because it's quite a passing reference. I happened to have been listening to this. I'm doing my listen through on a Feast for Crows. I happened to be listening to this chapter just a couple of days ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. Um, Cersei is getting dressed for dinner, and she just sort of, in passing, thinks a lot of her dresses, they're too small. They've been shrunk. The washerwomen must have been shrinking them in the wash to be, because they're against her. And we read this. Her wretched washerwomen had shrunk several of her old gowns so they no longer fit. She would have whipped them for their carelessness, but Tyanna had urged her to be merciful. "The small folk will love you more if you are kind," she had said. So Cersei had ordered the value of the gowns deducted from the women's wages, a much more elegant solution. So what do we have going on here? As I say, you can quite happily read through this chapter and not really pay attention to this, but I think for me, this is a fascinating and I think really wonderful bit of writing from George R. R. Martin. We have Cersei there, who has this a lot going on during this chapter. She is sort of ruling at the moment. She's Queen Regent, and she's got all of these different plots going on. She is about to have dinner with these a couple of sort of minor nobles, who she then tries to persuade to kill Bronn, because Bronn was obviously worked for Tyrion. But I mean, the person that she's trying to persuade to kill Bronn, it was a half decent tourney knight about 20 years ago. It seems just incredibly bizarre that she thinks that that could be a threat to Bronn in any way, shape, or form. She gets embroiled in debates and discussions about all manner of minutiae. Qyburn is giving her a world politics update, and she says, "Well, be quick about it. I'm really tired." He says things like, "So we've got reports that in Marine the slaves are being freed, and we've got reports of dragons." And she basically just sort of brushes this off and ignores it and says, "Oh no, Marine, it's harpies in Marine, not dragons, and we don't have slaves here, so it doesn't really matter." And we just see how she's just not paying any attention. She's plotting how she's got all this long, complicated plans to try and honey trap Marjorie, so that she can then sort of point at her and say, "Look, this woman, she's sleeping with all of these men." It's all, she's focusing on all of the wrong things, and then we get this section here when she thinks the washerwomen had been shrinking her clothes. Um, And I think we're supposed to think this is quite funny because I think George R. R. Martin is actually he's giving it. I mean, this is that if you put on weight and then what do you say? Your clothes aren't quite fitting that way. I mean, yeah, the funny answer is, oh, I think my clothes must have shrunk in the wash. That's what this is basically here. Um, and he's showing us in just this one thing. He's four, I think, clear and strong and important elements of Cersei's character. First of all, this complete lack of self-awareness. She's getting older. She's clearly got a drinking problem. She's not living a healthy lifestyle. Of course, she's putting on weight, but that thought never crosses her mind. Her first thought is uh, the wretched washerwomen must be shrinking my clothes. Uh, which first of all, a complete lack of awareness about herself. Secondly, the paranoia, which is her default setting. Somebody is out to get me. Uh, Thirdly, her solution is that she was going to have them whipped straight away. The cruelty immediately bubbles to the surface. And then finally, when she sort of takes a bit of advice and decides that, oh, well, actually, the thing to do is I'm just going to find them and take I mean, her clothes must be hugely expensive, and I'm going to take the cost of those clothes out from their money. Um, and she just like pats herself on the back, an elegant solution. Um, and this is her complete lack of strategic or even tactical thinking there. Having been told that the small folk should be loving you without even for one moment thinking that finding washerwomen for her, putting on a bit weight, might turn the people against her. I think this is a wonderful way for George R. R. Martin to show us the mind of Cersei, the lack of self-awareness, the paranoia that is always just under the surface, the cruelty, and the lack of any kind of strategic thinking, all just shown in one little thing. You asked whether this could have been Varys having the dresses shrunk. Personally, I mean, I wouldn't put it past him, but I think that no, this is just Cersei, and we're just seeing a bit about Cersei. Callie Summers, hi there. Callie saying tinfoil, of course. The Targaryens supplied steel for the Maester Lannister doom plot, so they'd have the only ridden dragons to keep power for the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy. Uh, well, so I mean, I love the thinking, and this is something that there is something here that I haven't yet worked my mind through, and I think that we will get more information, possibly through TV shows, actually, before we get them through the books. The Lannisters, um, there's a couple of slightly, I wouldn't say odd, but maybe not what you'd expect things that they do after the doom that make you just pause for a moment. Um, Now, one of those is that whereas they take everything out, they don't appear to take slaves. The Valyrians, they had slaves. Why is that? Maybe they just wanted to fit in with where they were, but they didn't really seem to actually try and fit in with the rest of Westeros. They kept their old gods and their old traditions, and they viewed themselves as being different and better. So that didn't sit. So why no slaves? Um, that's the first thing, and the second thing is that why sit for 100 years on Dragonstone? We don't know everything that was in Daenerys the Dreamer's vision. Perhaps Perhaps it was just that you need to get out of Valyria now, um, and then sit on Dragonstone and wait for further instructions. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe that's why they hung around for so long. But um, I think we often assume that Daenerys the Dreamer had like some sort of early version of what Aegon the Conqueror seems to have got, certainly in House of the Dragon. Um, did the idea that the Targaryens were part of this plot because they wished to keep power? Um, I mean, I think it makes it kind of makes sense, but the fact that we always have to come back to is that the Targaryens didn't try to re-establish Valyrian power in any way, shape, or form. Um, they landed on what's actually quite a small island, Dragonstone. They took it over. It was a Valyrian outpost already. Um, uh, but then what did they do? Did they establish an empire? Did they try and say we are the natural heirs and inheritors of the Valyrian freehold? No, they didn't do any of that. Did they try and invade wider lands over in Westeros? No, they didn't do any of that. They sat there for a century just on Dragonstone. So um, uh, there's a bit of extra information we've not got yet, is what I'm trying to say, which I think your tinfoil here kind of picks at a little bit, because it's there's some information we don't know about Daenerys the Dreamer's dream. What did she actually see? Why did the Targaryens not really do much for 100 years? We simply do not know those things. Um, Andrew Kay picking up the dresses thing, saying it's more Cersei Rhaenyra parallels as well. Concerns about weight gain and fading looks, both quite rash, paranoid, and cruel as well. The echoes between them are staggering. Yeah, so George R. Martin very much wants us to see, I think, echoes between Cersei and Rhaenyra in when we get to the Winds of Winter. Um, he also gives us some kind of echoes around this time. So when we actually see Jenna Lannister, we find that she once was a great beauty, but now she's quite a large woman, and so immediately we're there going, oh yeah, so Lannister's put on weight in middle age, just like everyone else does. Cersei does not think of herself as being heading towards middle age. Um, uh, she she kind of like occasionally randomly sort of looks at another woman and sort of notices that uh, they're slim or something like that, but she doesn't ever like go, well, and now I'm starting to lose a bit of my figure or anything like that. Doesn't, not until she does the walk of shame, at which point she does seem to get a little bit more self-aware. And this isn't a good way in many ways, but she does seem to view her own body in a lot more of an objective fashion than she had done previously. Um, Commander Ray, how true is it to say that the Lannister gold mines are going dry? And what other sources of wealth have the Lannisters been able to secure to ensure that they remain so wealthy? Also, what is the significance that their wealth will play in the story going forward? Um, uh, and Vance saying, I mean, you also asked about the Valyrian prophecy about Lannister gold. I think I've covered that one off already. Vance is saying, in the show, Tywin revealed to Cersei that the Lannisters no longer had any working gold mines. However, this appears to be a throwaway line, as it never came up again and had no bearing on the show at all. Will we see this idea in the books and play out further, in your opinion? Okay, so the Lannister mines. Is there any evidence in the books that the Lannister gold mines have run dry? I think the short answer is no. Um, we don't get. Tywin never mentions it. Perhaps he wouldn't. But Kevin, who is now basically the house patriarch, um, he, even as recently as the epilogue to A Dance with Dragons, he's there sort of promising Lannister gold to be helping out with the crown um, finances. So there doesn't seem to be a concern there at all. Um, Now, why, therefore? Might they have done that on the show? Yes, they mentioned it on the Lannisters. The gold mines haven't been producing now for a few years or something. Uh, so why might they have done that on the show? I mean, my only guess is because they wanted to make it clear that the Iron Bank was an actual threat, that the Lannisters couldn't bail out the Iron Throne anymore. I think that's probably where they were going. In the books, I think this is going to be different because I think Cersei's going to be out of King's Landing at some point in the next book. So this is all going to be rather a moot point. But yeah, there's no evidence. We don't get any reports from uh, mass layoffs of mine workers in the Westerlands. Um, it's not just the Lannisters who have gold mines. There are other houses that have got gold mines. We don't hear of any issues with them at all. And indeed, the when Robb sends his army over into the Westerlands, they some of his forces raid some of the gold mines, and there's no reports back to him saying, actually, you know what, these gold mines aren't in use anymore. So no, there's no hint of this, and I think it was just a thing they invented for the TV show. Um, I mean, maybe it will be an issue, but there's no evidence yet. Um, Oh, and Charis Bielemeier saying George R. Martin said in a blog post a year ago that the mines aren't dry. Well, I missed that one, but that's a good spot from you. And I'm glad that my thinking um, was right. Okay, thank you for that. Keith Boynton, will we see a Jaime Tyrion reunion in the final books? And if so, what are the odds of a reconciliation between the two of them? It seems like Tyrion is going down a darker path while Jaime is stumbling towards redemption. Is George R. R. Martin setting up a reversal wherein the villainous brother becomes more heroic and vice versa? Understanding, of course, that in this world things are never so black and white. Yeah, I think we probably will get them meeting again. That, if you read it, that section when Jaime releases Tyrion, this is a tipping point for both of them. It happens to be there that Tyrion has, through that book, he's lost everything that he thought he had. Um, he was Hand of the King. He had Shay. He thought that he had some sort of respect. Finally, at last, bit by bit, all of these things get taken away from him, and he ends up being falsely accused of Joffrey's murder, found guilty. Everybody has turned against him. Um, and Jaime turns up and he just takes it all out on Jaime. And his mindset at this point is, okay, everyone's always told me I'm the monster. I am the monster. That's who I'm going to be. He's just lashing out all over the place. So that's his mindset when they meet. Jaime, I've already kind of hinted at this, when he arrives back in King's Landing, one after another, everything that he thought about his former life is not there anymore. The Kingsguard has changed. His relationship with Cersei has changed. His father wants him to do stuff that he's just flatly refusing to do. He doesn't have his hand, so he's no longer the fearsome fighter that he used to be. Um, and he actually wants to come clean to Tyrion. Releasing Tyrion is an act of rebellion against his family in the first place, but then he doesn't want Tyrion to go without unburdening himself about the part that he played in what happened with Tisha, Tyrion's first wife. And so we get these two trajectories of character arcs which just meet at this one point where Jaime has to unburden himself about a terrible thing that he did a long time ago, because he needs to be right in himself. And Tyrion, who is at the point of saying, yes, I'm a monster, everything and more that everyone's ever said against me is right. And he just, this was already a sore spot for him, but he then just invents stuff to hurt Jaime. And so the clash is not just that they are there and they had an argument. They were both at this tipping point in their arcs that then sort of send them off elsewhere. So how and when they meet will depend on what the nature of that relationship is. Tyrion is slowly but surely rebuilding who he is. There are some things that he needs to get some reconciliation on himself. He has this where do whores go thing going on in his head. George R. Martin has said we will find out where they go. So that means perhaps he's going to reach some point where he does understand what happened there in the end. When he can get to a point where he can be potentially returning to Westeros, to his home. He can meet dragons, this thing that he's been obsessed with all this time. So he is starting to rebuild himself to a new life of sorts. Jaime, this is his turning his back on his family, which escalates the further he goes. He When he heads out and away from King's Landing, Cersei writes to him asking for help, and he just rips up the letter. The very last thing we see of him is Brienne turns up, and he follows her and just abandons his post. He's been sent out on a mission basically by the Lannisters, and he just abandons it because he's decided it's more important to be doing what Brienne is wanting him to be doing, which is to be fulfilling the oaths that he made. So, uh, Tyrion was going down a really dark path and is slowly building himself into a new Tyrion. We don't yet know what that new Tyrion is going to be looking like. Jaime is rebuilding himself, and he's building himself up to be a new Jaime. We don't yet know what that is going to look like. When they do finally meet, it's at least another book away, I think. They will be different people. And hopefully, they will be people who have got to some kind of peace with their past, each of them, which should therefore allow them to meet at a better place. So I think that, yes, they will meet again. They may or may not be on different sides, but I think that they will both realize what they mean to each other, and I think that that means that their friendship and relationship as brothers is actually going to be even stronger for what happened. Um, Let's go to Jahan saying, "Hi, Robert. I was wondering what your current view is on the Tyrion Targaryen theory. The main argument I've seen against it isn't that it doesn't fit the evidence, but instead that it ruins the idea of Tyrion being Tywin's true son over Jaime. Do you agree, or do you think that Tyrion not being Tywin's son by blood would make him being Tywin's only true son even more impactful?" So I say this every time. I I flip flop on Tyrion Targaryen. I the, there isn't any evidence against against it, other than, as I say, as you say, the main argument against it is that um, this prevents this idea that he is very like his father. He's very like Tywin, and um, Jenna Lannister pointed that out once to Tywin, and Tywin wouldn't speak to her for 6 months. Now, you could argue this either way, though, is that you could say maybe that's because he secretly knows that Tyrion isn't his son. and to be told that the person who isn't his son is this child that's most like him, that would really hurt. So you could argue this either way. I do really like this idea that the dynamic that the child that Tywin rejects actually is his child, and Cersei say is not his child. I do really like that. So ask me tomorrow, I'll have a different view. What I would say is that it's very clear that George R. R. Martin set this up as a possibility at the start of the book. All of this obsession with dragons, the Tyrion staring into the flames, all of that, the links being made across to John, they're the same. We're told that several times. He set this up as a possibility, and then it went quiet for the next couple of books. And then when we get to A Dance with Dragons, suddenly it comes roaring back. And he's there writing a book about all of his dragon knowledge, leading up to the point where he actually sees dragons and meets dragons. So um, I think by the end of the Winds of Winter, then we'll have enough to know whether this sort of peters back down again, or pushes us up to a thing. When Tyrion actually meets dragons, how will they react to him? That, I think, will probably be uh, the thing which steers us most. Um, let's go to Caius Ballerina saying, in the leaked bits of the scrapped prequel, this is the spin-off show prequel, which only ever got as far as a pilot. Lan is given to the Casterlys as a prisoner or wedding gift from the Starks, who betrothed their daughter to the future Lord. No idea why. Do we know if any of this came from George R. R. Martin? Okay. The answer is it didn't come from George R. R. Martin. I will give the background that we have it. So you may well have forgotten, but after Game of Thrones, then there was commissioned a pilot of a spin-off show, which was Blood Omen. It was going to be called. It had quite a lot of good names attached to it. Jane Goldman was going to be the showrunner. It had a couple of significant stars. I can't remember who off the top of my head. It was a while ago now. Who were, I think John Sim was attached to it actually. Who were going to be in it. They spent $35 million on a pilot, and then pulled the plug. At the very same day, they announced House of the Dragon. They were going to commission straight to a season without a pilot. Now, the backstory to all of that does appear to be something along the lines of they Game of Thrones season 8 happened, and they were not unaware. Let's put it this way: they were not unaware of the fan reaction to Game of Thrones season 8, and they were also not unaware of the fact that George R. R. Martin had not been involved in seasons 5 to 8 of Game of Thrones, and they did not have his source material to go on. So by this point, they'd already commissioned this spin-off, which was not his. There was contact. Jane Goldman did talk to George R. R. Martin. They had discussions, but this was going to be based on The Long Night. That was the idea, and George R. R. Martin hadn't written huge amounts. He'd written legends and scraps of information about it, but not a complete narrative. So this was going to be completely new. And the HBO execs, we don't know maybe the pilot wasn't good. I've not seen it. I can't say. But the HBO execs did get a bit frightened and decided that the best thing to do would be to have George R. R. Martin on board, to go with stories that George R. R. Martin had already finished writing. It is noticeable when you see the two things that we have had now given the green light. House of the Dragon, we've got the story of the Dance of the Dragons. That's already there. Dunk and Egg, we've got 3 stories. They're already there. So nothing that's been commissioned yet is speculative, is away from what George R. R. Martin has written. So that's a rather long way around of saying that no, George, this did not come from George R. R. Martin. He was consulted, but he was not actively involved in it, and that the information about the plots was not from him. This is different to his involvement in both House of the Dragon and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. When that comes out, he's not showrunner, he's not writing any episodes, but if you read, and he said this in various forms at various times, he is deeply and actively involved in the development of those stories. So when something happens on House of the Dragon, it may well go against what's in the books, but it means that George R. R. Martin has given it the thumbs up for the TV show, at least. And some things, like Aegon's prophecy, we're pretty sure that this is because George R. R. Martin is himself wanting this to be included. I hope that kind of makes some sort of sense. John Buxton saying, a channel member here, saying, "Evening, Robert, and everyone in the chat. Any thoughts on how the reunion of Tyrion and Cersei will play out?" Well, I mean, if they do have a reunion, Cersei almost certainly will be wanting to kill him, and Tyrion may well want to kill her too. My instinct is that their reunion is further away thematically than Jaime's and Tyrion's. Erin Sunek saying Naomi Watts was one of the stars. Yes, that was the name that I couldn't quite remember the name, but yeah, so Naomi Watts was attached to that pilot, which is somewhere lost. This is one of those things. It's like the pilot for Game of Thrones season 1. It's somewhere in the vaults of HBO. Maybe one day we will get to see it. I would be absolutely fascinated, but all we know is it wasn't given the green light. We hear rumors. I don't know which rumors to give credence to, and I wish I could give you more than that. But yeah, the decision was clearly made that they were going to go and stick closer to George R. R. Martin, what George R. R. Martin had finished writing. Right, let's go to a question about Carl Schultz saying, "Hello, Robert. I have a question about Tywin's notion of how the Lannister name needed to demand respect. I can understand why he had the feelings he had towards Tyrion, but why would he allow, that's understand in inverted commas, but why would he allow Tyrion to be disrespected publicly? Wouldn't he want the least of the Lannisters to demand the same respect?" This is a really interesting kind of like trying to tease your way through to where is the line for Tywin, because he didn't just let anyone do anything they wanted with Tyrion, because when Tyrion got captured by Cat, he went to war. And he was very clear that he went to war for Tyrion, because you do not do that to a Lannister. So clearly, that's the line. You have to show that well, that's way over the line. You can't do that to a Lannister. But at the same time, he kind of turned a blind eye to people mocking Tyrion, being mean to Tyrion. So where is the line? I mean, my part of my take on this is that he probably felt that Tyrion could look after himself or should look after himself. He's not there to. I mean, his attitude. We hear it. Yeah, anyone who must say "I am the king" is no true king. He thinks people should be able to stand up for themselves. He's not there to come rushing in to protect them. It's very noticeable that he uh, very publicly belittled Joffrey as king himself. So he was very happy for people to see the king as a child, as a petulant child, and treat Joffrey as a petulant child. He was okay with that. He was okay, I think, with, um, to a certain degree at least, with Joffrey um, being mean to Tyrion in public because this was Joffrey being the king and he could do what he wanted, and that was absolutely fine. Um, so all of this kind of like you stand up for yourself, and also we're Lannisters, we can do what we want. That's all fine. You outside people who are wishing to do drag the Lannister name through the mud, that is not fine. So it's quite, you have to tease your way through this to try and work out what is it that they're um, would what would he do if someone if he saw someone picking on Tyrion out in public, being mean to him? Well, I think he would expect Tyrion to respond himself, first of all. Would he come in if he thought that by implication the Lannisters were being mocked? Yes, I think he would. If he thought it was just Tyrion, no, I think he wouldn't. Um, let's go to Charis Ballerina. How can a weirwood grow in the rock but not in the Eyrie? It's a good question. So the there is inside Casterly Rock, there is a room with a weirwood. It's a small, rather withered weirwood, but it is there, seemingly and with its roots going all the way around this cave. It's quite hard to sort of navigate your way around the room, apparently. And this seems to have been left over from when the first men were ruling. Why could that grow and the one at the Eyrie not grow? Now, the working assumption we have with the weirwood's trees is that they are a network. It's the weirwood network, and they are all connected one to another underground through effectively their root system. So we're not talking about individual trees on their own. They're all hooked up. They're all linked in some way. Now, what this means is that you can't they can't go under big expanses of water, which is why we don't see weirwood trees over in Essos, for example. Um, they also can't seemingly go through huge amounts of rock. The one they tried repeatedly to be planting a weirwood tree in the Eyrie, which is way up near the top of a mountain, that didn't seem to work. The working assumption is that the weirwood roots couldn't get all the way down to sort of connect in with the actual soil. They had to go through lots of stone. Why, how, therefore, would you have a weirwood tree growing in Casterly Rock? Well, we're not told the exact position of that cave. Maybe it's quite near the ground. Maybe that is not a bit of solid rock. It seems to be growing in soil. So maybe there is a little bit of uh, or a large amount of dirt that it can sort of go down into the ground. We don't know, but we don't know because we do not have all the information. I think the working assumption is that it's not on stone. That bit is not on stone. It can get through the ground, and the roots can then sort of work their way around to meet up with the weirwood network more broadly elsewhere. Um, uh, Karkarsnark saying the rock is at least at sea level and with reasonable climate. Yeah, so at base, it's pretty. Yeah, it's near sea level because it's right by the coast. Um, let's go to a question from a Raven's Oath. Good evening, Robert. Good evening to you. The Lannister siblings all have interesting visions and dreams. Jaime has a weirwood dream as well as a waking vision while standing vigil over Tywin. Cersei dreams of a white city like Eris. Tyrion has many dreams, of course. The battle dream while with Illyrio fighting beside Bittersteel and having two heads like Maelys. Blackfire is not discussed enough, in my opinion. All three have plenty more throughout the books, of course. Love to hear what significance you personally place on the Lannisters having magical or prophetic-like dreams. Well, this is really fun because they do, um, but they seem incredibly varied. So I don't think that we're looking at a whole actual. This is the Lannister dream magic or something like that. I don't think that's what it is. So Jaime has a weirwood vision. He has a very long and detailed vision while sleeping on a weirwood tree stump. That is what prompts him to go back and rescue Brienne. So it's actually quite important. That changes a little part of his own arc and his own life. Um, uh, then we get so Cersei. You mentioned that she has a dream of having a white city being built across the Blackwater, which is something that Aerys himself had. Now, my instinct is that that is probably George R. R. Martin wanting to show us echoes of Aerys. That chapter is chocker full of references across between her and Aerys the Mad King, something George R. R. Martin wants us to be aware of, the links. Jaime Tyrion, that dream you're talking about, it's he gets very drunk. This is in Illyrio's manse. He gets very drunk. He's just been taken to Pentos across the sea. His whole life is gone. He hasn't got any idea about his future life, and he has a dream where he's in a battle with Illyrio and Bittersteel, and he sees there's dragons overhead, and he sees his father, and he kills his father in this dream, and then he sees Jaime, and he's smashing Jaime's face in. So this actually feels to me like just a stress dream. It just there doesn't seem to be for that one. I mean, I'd love the imagery is so vivid, but this does seem that he drank a lot, and then all of his stresses and anxieties came out. Illyrio, he's just met Illyrio. There's absolutely no reason why he shouldn't be having Illyrio randomly popping up in his dreams. Um, uh, Bittersteel is is there as well as Maelys Blackfire. So Tyrion has two heads. Both of those people are people who are exiled um, out from Westeros, which Tyrion now is. So he probably is feeling that. But also, there's a Blackfire connection, obviously, with both of those. And maybe Tyrion's subconscious is already starting to start making links here with what's going on with the what we think Illyrio is connected with the Blackfire, so maybe his subconscious is that. Him killing his father, he just done that, so obviously that's on his mind, and him smashing his brother's face in, figuratively, that's what he'd just done. He'd lashed out at him verbally. So all of that kind of makes some kind of sense for what you would expect in a dream, after he got very drunk. Doesn't He's still processing what's going on in his life, what he's done, what might be coming next. So the two heads thing, he has two heads, and one of them is involved in all the fighting, and then he just looks at the other one. He sees that one's just crying, And I mean, I don't think you have to be a professional psychologist to try and think. So actually, this is Tyrion has created this persona who's been doing all of these things, but there's another part of him that's really sad. um, and so I think that's at base, that's what's going on there. So, in my view, no overarching Lannister dream vision magic thing going on. Lots of different things, and we have to treat each of them individually. Reflective rambling, picking up a question for that elf Torren. Who do you think is the Valonqar? Jaime, Tyrion, or someone else? Has your opinion changed over time? Um, I have got questions about the Valonqar, which a bit later, but I'll answer this now. So the Valonqar is part of the Maggie the Frog prophecy that Cersei gets. Um, and at the end of your life, the Valonqar will wrap his hands around your cold white neck and strangle you to death, basically. Valonqar is High Valyrian for little brother or possibly little sister. Um, Maggie the Frog's prophecies have been pretty on the nose so far, so we're expecting this also to be true. I mean, my standard line on these, if you've been watching these, excuse me, if you've been watching these live streams for a while, my standard line, which I think is absolutely true here as well, is that actually the truth of who or what this is less important than what Cersei believes it to be. Cersei believes that this is Tyrion, and she is acting on that basis, and that is driving some of the action. So that is the most important thing here, rather than who actually is it. What we're really doing is asking who's going to end up killing Cersei. And my instinct has always been that the most likely subject here is Jaime, as he is the younger brother. The only thing here against this is the wrapping hands around her neck. Can Jaime now still wrap hands? He's got one hand, the other one's a golden hand. Can that be wrapped around? I don't know. But yeah, my instinct is that I did once have this idea that um, perhaps Arya would be doing it. She would be a little sister, which might still count as it. But she could faceless man change into Jaime, so that Cersei thinks that it's Jaime, but actually technically it's Arya, because let's not forget that Cersei is on Arya's kill list. I don't. I think that's less likely now. The more I think on it. So yeah, the several times Jaime and Cersei say things along the lines of, um, "We came into this world together. We'll leave this world together," and I think they will. I think they'll probably. Um, Jaime will probably kill her, then die himself in some way. Fabrizio Qualiani saying, "Hey Robert, first time catching you live. Welcome. And if this is your first time watching live, anyone, welcome to you as well. Do you believe that Jaime would have bested Ned if that soldier didn't intervene? Seems to be ambiguous." Um, well, it is a bit ambiguous. The bit that we don't know about is how good Ned is, because he deliberately um, doesn't enter tourneys or anything like that, because he doesn't want to show people um, what his tricks are in fighting, in case he has to come up against them. So we don't know how strong a fighter Ned is. We think he's pretty good. We do, however, know that Jaime, at the peak of his powers, which is what he was here, was the finest swordsman in the land. Sir Barristan says that he was the most natural swordsman of his generation. Brienne thinks that he would. I mean, almost bested her when he was in chains, having been a prisoner for months on end, and she was at pretty much full strength, and she's there thinking, "Wow." Just imagine how good this guy would be if he wasn't in chains. So I think the answer is if we had a Jaime versus Ned one-on-one fight. I mean, I'd love Ned to win, but honestly, Jaime is probably the better fighter of the two of them. So that I think is the answer. But that was not what was happening there, um, and it wouldn't have been a fair fight. So yeah, I think that's your answer. Ned's a good fighter. Jaime, all the indications are, would be an even better fighter. Um, Oh, Carl Carlsnark saying Jamie seems legit, but not a lot of actual war experience per se. More of a duelist or tourney bro, it seems. Yes, I mean he did have some experience fighting the Kingswood Brotherhood, so he did have some actual experience. And I mean, I can't remember whether he was there for the Greyjoy Rebellion as well, but it's not like Ned had, you know, he wasn't a huge battle hardened veteran. Yes, he was involved. He was there in the Greyjoy Rebellion. He was also there in the Battle of the Trident, and came down for the Battle of the Bells. But it's not like he did fought hundreds of campaigns. He fought some things. Jamie also had some real fighting experience too. Let's go with Maura Lee. In Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister ended up being the last member of House Lannister. Um, what do you foresee for them in the last two books? Will Tyrion be the last survivor of the house? So I think one thing we have to keep on reiterating with this is House Lannister is much bigger in the books than on the TV show. Even if you get rid of all of the named characters we know about, there will be more Lannisters lying around. There'll be the cadet branch, the House Lannister of Lannisport as well. So um, I don't think we're looking at wiping out House Lannister. Uh, However, will Tyrion end up inheriting Casterly Rock? I I like to think so. I mean, I want him to, and I think that although we're a long way out from it, it does kind of make thematic sense that the thing that he was um, denied by Tywin is what he ends up with would be a good ending, I think, to this story. So um, I see no reason why not. I don't think Jamie survives the story, and then it's just a matter of if Tyrion is in good standing with whoever is ruling the Seven Kingdoms at the time, then he, by default, I think, should be the Lord of Casterly Rock. Um, let's go to the Toothless Paste actually saying Ned is alleged to have killed Arthur Dane. Maybe he's hiding. Maybe he's hiding. He couldn't. I mean, Ned admitted that Arthur Dane would have killed him, but for whatever Howland Reed did. We don't know what Howland Reed did, but the clear implication is that Arthur Dane was about had defeated Ned in combat, or was about to defeat him. Uh, Daniel Dibka saying, I think one-armed Jamie could beat no-head Ned. Harsh, but probably true. Lord Medici saying, can you think of any reason why Dan and Dave, that's the showrunners of Game of Thrones, the TV show, kind of forgot about the fact that the Lannisters are blonde? It seems to me that at some point, Nikolai Coster-Waldau and Peter Dinklage, neither of whom is naturally blonde, just stopped dyeing their hair. You can see this as early on as season 4, so the phenomenon traces back to before the last couple of seasons. So is there any meaning to this, or is it just carelessness to detail? Well, I mean, I don't think we've ever had an official answer from them on this. You're not the only person to notice it. Their hair did start out, particularly Jaime, started out quite golden, and by the end it was pretty muddy brown, I think is probably the best way of saying it. By contrast, Cersei did keep her golden hair all the way through. It changed length, but she did keep her golden hair. Now, that was a wig, but they could have changed it, the changed color of it. Her hairstyles definitely changed during the show. So I can only guess, uh, and this is perhaps a charitable guess, uh, that giving the showrunners or perhaps the wardrobe team some credit, thematic credit, but Jaime and Tyrion both went on arcs that took them away from their Lannister roots. And one way that you could kind of symbolically show that is by their hair slowly shifting in color away from Lannister blonde and more towards a browner color. Now, that may be me just being charitable. I do not know. I think on a production as large as Game of Thrones, it's not just the showrunners who are in charge of what the characters look like. There's a whole host of other people. This will have been noticed. So it will have been deliberate in some way. And the only explanation that I can come up with is that it was deliberate in order to symbolically show something. Um, Haley Hustad. This is my first Patreon question, and I wanted to say thank you for all the work you do and the content you create. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. Did Tywin know that Cersei's children were fathered by Jaime? If so, did he personally go to any lengths to keep it a secret? Do we know how many of the other lords knew about it before Stannis sent his ravens? Okay, so let's start with Tywin first. Did he know? Um, and I mean, I think the answer is that he didn't know, but he didn't ask. I think he was willfully ignorant of the fact. Let's put it that way. Um, he he was not in um, King's Landing for a lot of the time that Jaime and Cersei were together. So for the times when their three children were conceived, he wasn't in King's Landing. We're told that Jaime and Cersei were discovered once when they were in Casterly Rock, but this was basically by their mother, who said, "Don't do it again, or I'll tell your father." So the implication is that he didn't know then. So um, there's no evidence to say he definitely did know. Um, he vehemently says it's not the case. Kevin, by the end of Dance with Dragons, then Kevin Lannister is basically accepted it as a fact by that point. Um, and if Kevin knew, then you'd be hard pressed to think that Tywin couldn't have figured it out. So I think uh, my instinct is that he probably didn't know to start with. He may well later on have kind of intellectually figured it out, but decided that he just did not want to go there. He was very much about the appearance of um, what was going on with the Lannisters for himself. We talked about the Shay and the potential for that tunnel to Chataya's. So he cared about the appearance of what the Lannisters, what people thought of the Lannisters, rather than actually what was going on with the Lannisters. As for who knew before Stannis sent out his raven, or his ravens across the land, well, by that point, quite a few people had sort of been told or figured stuff out. But knowing is uh, is a completely different game. And this actually, you get fascinating conversation between Davos and Stannis about why he delayed. What because he delayed for months, nearly a year, before he sent out his ravens, and part of that was he was just sort of he sent Davos out to sort of test the ground with his bannermen. But Davos says you don't have the evidence, and that's why you didn't immediately accuse them. You think you figured it out, but you don't have definitive proof. And this they were highlighting the difference between Stannis and Renly, is that Renly just didn't care. He wanted to be king. He was going to go out and become king. And he didn't need to justify it. He didn't need to be the next in line. He didn't need to have proof about why uh, the Lannisters should be kicked out. He just wanted to become king. He didn't care about that detail. Stannis, he wanted the proof. And he did not have 100% proof. What did he have? He knew what the Baratheon or Robert Baratheon's children looked like. His bastard children looked like. He had a list of what Baratheon children have looked like through history. Is that is that evidence? Yeah, it's evidence. Is it proof? No, it's not proof. Chaos Ballerina. Uh, Tyrion has to end up ruling the Rock. They live in a mountain or gold mine. Jaime even calls the rocks alive. They are fantasy dwarves and need to be ruled by a heavy drinker that wields a battle axe. I love that thought. Yeah. So the dwarf has to end up in the mine. Yeah, I'd never really thought about that. But yeah, that would work well. Okay. Andrew Biederman saying, "Hello, Robert. I'm really interested in the impact of Maggie the Frog's prophecy on the course of Westeros's history. It seems right up there with Aegon's prophecy and its impact, maybe even more so on the current story. Do you think this is completely a matter of how much Cersei believes in the prophecy, or is Maggie's more real than others?" The first parts of it did seem to come true in Cersei's youth. Okay, so I've got the prophecy here. Now, this is not I should say this is not just written out. It's not a prophecy that you can write down. This is Cersei's memory of what's a conversation. It's not even what a person said to her. This is a conversation that she had. She got told she could ask 3 questions and she got answers to those questions. And so this is it. Cersei starts and says, "When will I wed the prince?" This is the timing, incidentally, was when she'd just been told that she was going to be marrying Prince Rhaegar. Um, and she just she'd heard that there was this magical person, and she went there with a friend, and you can have 3 questions. When will I wed the prince? Maggie says, "Never. You will wed the king." And then Cersei clarifies, "I will be queen, though." And Maggie goes, "Aye, queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and to take all that you hold dear." And then Cersei says, "Will the king and I have children?" And Maggie says, "Oh, aye, 6 and 10 for him, and 3 for you. Gold shall be their crowns, and gold their shrouds," she said. "And when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life from you." Now, there was another bit of prophecy which went to Cersei's friend, which basically said, "You're not going to survive long," which is true. Cersei pushed her down a well. So Maggie seems to get this right. That bit she got right. Will I wed the prince? No. That's right. You will wed the king. That's right. Cersei says that, and then you queen she will be. That's right. So up until that point, that's all fine. Also, will the king and I have children? And she says 6 and 10 for him and 3 for you. That's all fine. So these things definitely seem to have happened. The other things, though, are potentially in the future. Um, Her three children, gold shall be their crowns and gold their shrouds. Well, two of them have already been ruler, and Marcella is there with a plot to make her ruler as well. So that's the potential, and gold their shrouds, so they're all going to die. She's going to see their deaths. We've already seen Joffrey go, so that looks like that's on track as well, which means that the other things here are the younger and more beautiful queen to cast you down and take all that you hold dear, and the Valonqar. Um, so those are the bits that we're still holding, and we don't know yet what exactly that. Who is the younger and more beautiful queen to cast you down and take all that you hold dear? Is this? I mean, it could be many things. Is this Marjorie? Certainly seems to be that's what Cersei's starting to get paranoid about. Could this be Daenerys? Could this be, from a completely different interpretation, could this be Brienne taking Jaime away from her? These are all different options. Then we get the Valonqar, which is, well, which we've talked about already. So, is this impactful in Westerosi history? Well, I don't think this is making these things happen. This is explaining to Cersei what is going to happen. And therefore, I don't think it's huge. So, what impact has this had on Cersei so far? How has this changed things in Westerosi history? Well, she's become convinced that Tyrion's going to try and kill her. So, she's had people hunting for dwarves and killing them. It's been driving her to be trying to eliminate Marjorie. That will definitely have a big impact. Uh, would I therefore put this up against Aegon's original prophecy? I mean, I think it's not been confirmed in books yet, but the assumption is it will. If that is pretty much the same in the books, and if this did lead to Aegon invading all of Westeros, then yes, that I think is clearly the one that has influenced events in Westeros the greater. But we do not know yet everything which is kind of falling out from Cersei. She hasn't told other people. This is just stuff going on in her own mind, and so how this is going to impact on her actions, um, uh, we have yet to really see. Okay, Otis 480. Hello, Robert. Always wanted to ask if you could make a video like the Game of Thrones from the perspective of Tywin and Cersei Lannister. Um, yeah, I've done Lord of the Rings from perspectives of different people. That maybe I should do some. I mean, Uh, I did one from Rob's perspective, which I quite enjoyed doing. So maybe at some point I would do Tywin or so at Cersei. Um, but here, could we talk about Cersei, how Cersei or Tywin perceived Ned's actions in the whole King's Landing developments in Book One, and what the grand plan of the Lannisters was? Um, have a good stream. I will rewatch it on YouTube. If you're watching this back on YouTube, hi. I know a lot of people watch these back later rather than live, so I'm just acknowledging you. In terms of Tywin and Cersei, so they will have in book one, they were in separate places and they had separate um, uh, experiences and perspectives. So Cersei thought that she was playing a very clever Game of Thrones against Ned. She was playing a very defensive game. She didn't want people to be discovering about her and um, uh, Jaime, but she was also low key trying to kill off Robert Baratheon. And she was thinking that she was being very clever outmaneuvering Ned. Now, turns out you didn't have to be very clever to outmaneuver Ned in King's Landing. So her perspective was that Ned was coming in, bumbling around, trying to find information she did not want him to be finding. And so she happily stopped him. Um, Now, Tywin's interpretation. We actually get to see a little bit of this at the end of the book when he sends Tyrion off. He sends Tyrion off to King's Landing to basically be Hand of the King in his stead. He is angry with Cersei about what happened. A lot of things that were going on there. In particular, the getting rid of Barristan Selmy and beheading Ned. He thought both of those were hugely damaging to the Lannister interest, and that's why he sent Tyrion, because even then he understood that Tyrion was clever enough to see that these were problems. So at a very high level, Cersei thinks she's doing marvelously and managing everything in King's Landing. Tywin's there going, why you're causing me so many problems here? And when he arrives in King's Landing later, he feels that you can tell it's just like, right, okay, now I'm just going to take control back myself. Everyone just get out of the way. You've been messing this up. I'm now going to take control. Kind of Ray saying generational trauma is a core aspect of the Lannisters' arcs in this story, and I wanted to ask where you think it began, the different ways it has caused not only Tywin and his children, but the wider family. And do you think any of them will be able to move past that trauma and pain and be better people than Tywin set them up to be? So I think this is a really good observation that you say generational trauma. I mean, what I'm interpreting by that is that who Tywin was and what he did impacted on who his children were. Who Tywin's father was and what he did impacted on what Tywin was, and it goes back generation after generation after generation. This is obviously true for all humans, but lots of characters in the stories. So, could any characters break free from that? I think what you're seeing is Cersei not. Cersei is trying to do what her father would do. She thinks that she is being a Lannister. She is doing the right, clever Lannister things. She is doubling down on this. Tyrion and Jaime are both in different ways trying to tackle their own past and come to terms with who they are actually as a person, not just who their family has made them to be. Jaime, we see his last few chapters, he's full of him. He's working through what different members of his family would do, and he thinks he would do things differently. It starts snowing when he's in Riverrun, and his immediate thoughts were, what would my father be doing here? Would he be ordering in the harvest? Would he be sort of putting up the shutters for winter? How would he deal with the small folk in this situation? And then he decides he's doing it differently to his father. He thinks about, snow fights, Cersei and Tyrion. But he wants to move on. So Jaime is deliberately going through the process of rejecting and that's the point at which he rips up the letter from Cersei as well. He deliberately rejecting that who he was as created by his family. Tyrion has also now left Westeros and basically left his family, and he is George R. R. Martin does this a lot, so it's not unique to Tyrion, but he takes on Hugo Hill. He's a new character. He's a different person. People don't see him as a Lannister anymore. For the first time in his life, he is not being protected by the Lannister name. It's a completely different experience for him. So he is now having to experience life not being a Lannister. Interestingly, towards the end, and when he's there with his sellsword company, he then starts once more embracing the idea that he's a Lannister. he's basically buying his freedom by writing a big bunch of IOUs based on Lannister gold, and he's sort of handing this out, which obviously he only has access to if he gets back to Westeros, to Castle Rock, and pardon me, gets back to Castle Rock, and he is in charge of the Lannister gold. So. Whereas Jaime seems very much to be moving away from the family, Tyrion at the moment is now starting to turn his mind back to Westeros, with him there, not with the family surrounding him, but as a Lannister. So they're on slightly different arcs. And the short answer is, are they dealing with the generational trauma? I don't think they're quite going that deep, but I think those two are certainly making a start. Tasta asking whether Tyrion or Jaime fit the role of the Valonqar, whether it might be a wild card like the Hound. I think I've covered the Valonqar a little bit already in this, so I won't go over that one. I mean, the idea that this is a complete wild card and someone like the Hound, I don't see how that fits his end sort of character arc. I have to say, it could be, but for me, Tyrion is who Cersei thinks it is, rather than who it actually is likely to be. Tyrion, he has to get through his trauma to the point where that would be a ridiculous. Him killing his sister, he doesn't need to do that. Jaime perhaps needs to get to the point where he is willing to do that to end that fundamental relationship that he had. So, a friend saying, where do whores go? I did cover this one a little bit earlier, and George R. R. Martin has very clearly said, we will find out. Alhad, in the Dance of the Dragons epilogue, while talking about Kevin's wife, Cersei says something like, it is a wise woman who knows her place. Do you think she was teasing Kevin? If yes, why would she tease Kevin at that moment? So I went back and had a look at this. So Cersei has arrived back from her walk of shame. Um, Kevin has taken over control of the small council. He's going through and dealing with the business and of the day, and decides he's going to have dinner with Cersei. He goes, has dinner with Cersei. She asks him a couple of questions about what's going on, but nothing in too much detail. She seems quite subdued, and she asks if Kevin's wife is going to be coming to a King's Landing now he's there, and he says no, she's. I mean, I can't remember the exact words, but it's something along those lines. She doesn't really like the big city life. Her place is at Castle Rock, and Cersei says, "It is good for a woman to know her place." And Kevin's like, "What do you mean?" And she says, "I think I just said what I meant." And then it changes. They change tack and talk about something else. Now, is that her being sort of trying to tease him or wind him up? I think, and we'd have to wait until we get Cersei's POV on this. I think it's much more likely that she has been chastened by the experience of the walk of shame, but she is trying to make Kevin think that she's a changed woman. I think that's where she's at. So that exchange, it's quite enigmatic in the way it's written. It has to be said. She says it's good for a woman to know her place, which is a very not Cersei thing to say. So Kevin is immediately suspicious. At which point she says, "I said what I said," basically, and then they move on. The plain text reading of it is that she's just trying to show that she's a changed person. He notices that she's her hair has all been cut off. He notices that he's the previously Cersei would have shown that off as like a hit with the crown, and you can see the gold. You can see where she's bald, and she would have made a thing out of it. But here, she actually hasn't. She's just wearing something over her head, which is just sort of to keep her head warm. The impression she's giving is of somebody who has been chastened by her experiences. Almost certainly that's not what's going on, but that's what seems to be what she is trying to put across to him. Um, Al Had saying Lannisters tried to get dragons or dragon eggs by pretending to help Rhaena Targaryen. This is way back in history. Did people in Westeros think that they could control dragons without having the Valyrian blood? Similar attempts were made with Daenerys in Karth. Yeah, I guess so. Yes. I think the short answer on this one is that. So the background history, I should probably say, is that yes, this is Rhaena Targaryen who, she's got quite a troubled history. She was over on Fair Isle. She met her husband. She probably was actually more interested in his husband's sister, but she stayed in uh, Casterly Rock for a bit with her dragon, and the Lord Lannister at the time basically said, you could leave some eggs here if you want. Um, and she's like, no, I'm not giving up dragon eggs that easily. So do people think that they could just hatch a dragon and bond with it? Some people probably do. The fact is, the Targaryens don't truly understand how dragon bonding works anymore. So nobody else has got the foggiest idea. What other people will see is Targaryens riding dragons, but Targaryens, particularly at that point in history, not letting non-Targaryens try. So when you get to the dragon seeds incident in the Dance of the Dragons, then you see that people queue up to try who there's no real hint that they even think that they've got any Valyrian heritage in them. They just want to have a try to ride a dragon. So it's the lack of knowledge out there. I could well imagine that the Lannisters think, well, if I can get a dragon egg to hatch and I can raise that dragon from when it was a baby, then maybe I could ride a dragon. Who knows? Nobody really understands. All of the knowledge went with Valyria. Callie Summers saying, I assume Cersei knew her place was the throne. Well, it may well be that that's what she's thinking. Um, uh, but that's not what she's presenting at that moment in time. We're not inside her head, so we don't know. Almost certainly, she hasn't had a complete change of personality and just suddenly become really humble and thinking that a woman should know her place and things like that. Almost certainly, that's not the case. But that is what she is trying to put across to Kevin at that moment in time. Corvus Corax. Tyland Lannister confounds me. Is there something implied that I'm missing? How was he allowed to be Aegon III's hand, and why did he even want to be after what was done to him? So, Tyland Lannister, one of the Lannister twins during the Dance of the Dragons. He was the one who was the master of coin for Team Green. He was the one who took the crown's money, distributed it out to different places, hid it basically. When Team Black took the the um, uh, the Red Keep, he was captured and tortured for basically 6 months. He was blinded, largely crippled, um, but he didn't give away his secrets. Towards the end of the war, he gets sent over to the Free Cities to try and get some more armies to try and help out. But by the time he comes back, he ends up as Aegon III's Hand of the King. How so? Well, the the situation, I've got a video coming out which sort of touches on this, not about this specifically, but touches on this, is the situation is after the war, is that the nation, the continent had been rent in two. You had two sides battling to be winning. Then it got even messier. Who knew whose side anyone was on? Aegon III was too young to rule. He had another 5 years. He needed to grow up before he was an adult. So they decided, well, we need to have some regents, not just one regent, but let's have a whole squadron of them, 7 regents, just to make sure we've got balance. No one person can have complete control. We'll have a hand of the king, but we need to balance that. So they created this role, protector of the realm, which was, I mean, it's not a completely new role, but the idea there is that you have the hand of the king, who basically is handling domestic policy, and then you have protector of the realm, who's more sort of the military matters. And that was a Corbray, who was therefore from Team Black to balance Tyrion Lannister being on Team Green. Now, that's how he was allowed to be Hand of the King, because he was part of a massive team. 7 different regents, a Hand of the King, a Protector of the Realm, a full small council. No one person had the huge power. Lots of people feeling that they could probably operate in the king's name. Why might he want to? Well, why not? He was in King's Landing. He could have gone back to Casterly Rock. But he would just effectively be acting as regent or co-regent for his nephew. Here, he was being offered to be Hand of the King. So I think that's probably why. He was quite clever about how he did this, though. What he did was he claimed that all of that nasty torture had affected his memory, and he couldn't remember which side of the war different people were on. So he would just treat people, as if the war didn't happen. Didn't matter what side they were on. And he's had so much scarring that he wore this kind of silk hood over his head all the time, to sort of protect everyone else's delicate eyes, but that just created this sort of extra aura about him. He's a fascinating character. He's one of the people who was there trying desperately at the end of the war to end the war. What you find, the closer to the end of the Dance of the Dragons you get, the more people who get into this category of, you know what, this war has been going on so long with these 2 different sides, we now just have to stop it. So he was one of those people who was basically trying to stop it right at the end. Gina Z saying, thank you for covering the Lannisters. You're very welcome. I would love to hear more about the Lannister women who don't get as much page time as Cersei. Jenna, Joanna, and Johanna, for example. I talked a bit about Joanna and Johanna. I'll talk a little bit about Jenna. So Jenna is the sister, the only daughter out of the 5 Lannister siblings, Tywin and his siblings. She was the 3rd oldest, and she is clever. She seems very competent. She was at a young age married off to a Frey. Tywin really didn't like it. She was quite disappointed with it, but she went along with it because her father was in charge at the time. This was a power grab by the Freys, incidentally. And so with Emmon Frey was her husband, but she very clearly was in charge in that relationship. He's the one calling the shots. When Joanna Lannister Tywin's wife dies, she takes on this kind of proxy motherhood role for Tywin's children, and they feel quite affectionate towards her. And so when Jaime later on meets her again, she's there. She's like grabbing his cheek and all things like that. And she seems to be uh, quite an indomitable person. Jaime sets up a war council, and she just walks in, grabs a chair, and sits down, and dares anyone to say that she shouldn't be there. No one does say that. Um, she is now in River Run. She's been given River Run, or her husband technically has been given River Run. She rather insightfully says actually she'd much rather not have River Run. She'd much rather have one of the smaller houses that they know that people have been destroyed. All that family is gone, so she can just set up and basically start a new house in there. Whereas the thing is, the Tullys weren't all gone. Edmure, for example, was still very much alive. She pushes for Edmure to be killed. She thinks that Jaime should kill Edmure. And this is effectively as much for her as for anything else, because she thinks that as long as there are Tullys out there, they will be trying to get River Run back. I suspect she's right. We'll probably see this. The Blackfish is out, and we will almost certainly see this happen in the Winds of Winter. So she's a clever woman. She's competent. People like Jaime look up to her and respect her. And she's now in River Run. But she's concerned for the future, and she's probably right to be concerned for the future. Thomas Seven Strings is in there. He's stayed in there, and he is basically a part of the Lady Snowheart's Brotherhood Without Banners. And so I think we're probably going to get some sort of sedition or assault on a River Run coming up in the Winds of Winter. I've got about 3 more questions for my patrons. So now is a time if you want to drop any more questions into the chat. Now's a good time to do it. Auntie Slayer saying, "Hi, Robert. I want to thank you for getting me back into the Song of Ice and Fire books. You're very welcome. I love it when people start reading because of these live streams. Last night, I read Jaime's Soul chapter in A Dance with Dragons, and I think it's one of the most insightful and fascinating in the series. In this chapter, both houses, Blackwood and Bracken, give the crown hostages. However, this only happens the way it does because the houses both get in their own way, insulting what the other has given for ransom. The implication to me is that both houses are trying to take Jaime for a fool or unserious. I.e. Titus, which prompts him to remind them of what his father did to people who made a joke of House Lannister. Ultimately, my question is, the reader knows Jaime is becoming more grounded and empathetic, but are the Lords of the Realm picking up on it too? Would they have tried to pull this stunt with anyone, or does it speak to someone about Jaime's perception in the realm? It's great to see him become a better person, but you can also see how quickly kindness can be taken with weakness and how fine the line is between them. Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's an interesting, as I say, it's a really interesting chapter. I think George R. Martin is showing us the Brackens and the Blackwoods as much as Jaime in this, in that obviously both of them are going to try and get away with the least that they can, in terms of offering up hostages. I don't think that's just a Jaime thing. I think that they're what is interesting is how, and I suppose it's open for interpretation, the extent to which this is Jaime making this happen, or it just happens to be the case. But because the Brackens and the Blackwoods want over on the other one, they actually help Jaime get better deals. So I don't think this is them recognizing anything different about Jaime. Most people have not met Jaime. They just know him by repute. So I don't think that there's people who have seen a change in him. Charis Ballerina, what happened to Rohan? I assume that's Rohan Weber. And does Littlefinger have a plan to kill Tyrion, or is he just hoping he'll drop dead to free Sansa in time to marry Harry? Okay, two questions. What happened to Rohan Weber? We're told, so she married into the Lannisters, but we're told that she disappeared in mysterious circumstances. We don't have any more information than that. I think we will find out in a future Dunk and Egg story. This is the same Rohan Weber that we get in the Swan Sword. So, I mean, if I had to guess, then maybe Dunk swings by and they have a little fling or something. Who knows? And then she decides she doesn't want to go back to the Lannisters, which kind of would make sense. But that's just a guess. That I've got absolutely zero information. The fact that George R. R. Martin left that there does seem to imply that perhaps he's got a thought about it, which he will reveal later, presumably in a Dunk and Egg story. So I think the involvement of Dunk and or Egg is likely, but beyond that, I think it would just be guesswork. Does Littlefinger have a plan to kill Tyrion? Or is he hoping he'll drop dead to free Sansa in time to marry Harry? So Sansa is married to Tyrion. Littlefinger has Sansa and is planning on marrying her to Harry the heir. Now, there are several layers to this. First of all, at the moment, nobody knows that this is Sansa, or if they do, they're staying quiet about it. But the plan is to reveal who she is actually on her wedding day. Now, at that point, people would say, "Hang on a moment, but she's married to Tyrion." That marriage, however, was not consummated. George R. R. Martin has answered a related question to this, which is, could you get a marriage annulled? Sort of the high lords and ladies, can they get their marriage annulled if it was unconsummated? And he has said that the High Septon potentially could do that. Now, the High Septon has changed a couple of times. At the moment, obviously, it's the High Sparrow. The High Sparrow probably wouldn't be wishing to be involved in those kind of games, but does he have a plan? Will Littlefinger kill Tyrion? No, I think Tyrion's way beyond Littlefinger's reach at this precise moment of time. I think he will get the marriage annulled. It would not surprise me if he turns up with some annulment from a previous High Septon that Cersei arranged for one to be killed, for example. Maybe Littlefinger had got something out of him before he died. 444 saying, "Hi, Robert. Tywin, Kevin, Stafford, Willem, and probably Tyrek. All of them are dead. Cersei, Jaime, Lancel, Davon, and even Tyrion are not in safe positions. As only Freys die out at a bigger rate than Lannisters, who could be the head of the house when A Dream of Spring ends?" Yeah, so I think Tyrion, because you have to go through this rather than say who's who might survive. You have to go through in order. So at the moment, then we have Jaime. If he's not a member of the Kingsguard, I think he will die in the story. Cersei, I think she will die. Then next up, we get to Tyrion. I think he will survive. So yes, there's lots of other Lannisters, but if Tyrion's alive and in good standing with whoever's king at the time, then it doesn't matter about all those other Lannisters because Tyrion's the next in line. And final question from my patrons, DickCrabb'sSquire. I'm sure the topic of the Lannister children possibly being the Mad Kings due to certain clues, but that is George R. R. Martin's gardening style. Just like there are clues that Syrio could be Jaqen, Septa Lemore could possibly be Lyanna or Ashara. In the early development of these characters, he may have plans for them that never pan out once their story arc progresses. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point to be talking about his writing style impacting on things. Now, I'm not sure I would agree with the Syrio Jaqen or Septa Lemore Lyanna things. They don't personally work for me, but I definitely think that George R. R. Martin started in book one with the hints that Tyrion might be a secret Targaryen. Reread those opening 2 or 3 chapters of Tyrion. He's there. He says about how he used to read every book about dragons that he possibly could. He would spend hours staring into the flames. He remembered going to see the dragon skulls and touching them and feeling quite relaxed around them. He dreamt of flying. I mean, there's so much imagery added to which um, the connection between him and Jon Snow is consistently being reiterated. Jon's a bastard, Tyrion's a dwarf. It's the same kind of thing, says Tyrion. They're both there being sort of like ostracized by their families in different ways. This is the link between them. They end up, they literally stand there, shake hands, and call each other friends. This is the strong link has been forged between those two. And Jon obviously is a hidden Targaryen. So I think George R. R. Martin definitely set out strong on this and then rode back. The question for me is this that he just followed Tyrion's character, and as you say, as a gardener writer, it just didn't really pan out that way. So he's just going to not really talk about that bit anymore? Or is this like the Isle of Faces mentions? The Isle of Faces is mentioned 3, 4 times in the opening half of A Game of Thrones. It's uh, it's it's clearly there to supposed to be high in people's thoughts. Jorah even mentions it as one of the main sites of Westeros when he's talking to Dany. This is uh, right up there as one of the things we're supposed to be thinking, oh, Isle of Faces, that'll be worth knowing. And then hardly any mentions going through for the next 2 or 3 books. Like there's like 1 or 2 mentions across the next 3, 4 books. Uh, that was him, and he has admitted this, slowing things down because he could not keep dropping things in about that at that pace if he at that pace was in order to pay them off at the end of book 3. If he actually is only paying them off at the end of book 7, say, then he doesn't have to drop things in at as quick a pace. So uh, I don't know. I guess we'll see. We'll see with Tyrion where it ends up. Whether this is one of those things where he's just Gardner righted his way out of it, or whether he's just paced himself. Okay, let's have a quick look in the chat. That Alf Torren saying, or do you think the dance would have gone differently if Rhaenyra had married Jason Lannister? Would Tyland still be Team Green? I mean, if she'd married Jason Lannister, I mean, it would have been very different. Instead of Daemon, yeah, that would have made things very different. Callie Summers saying the High Septon wouldn't need to be trying to get involved in the Game of Thrones. Someone as generous and fair as Jaehaerys or Alicent might opt to annul the wedding at Sansa's request. Yes, potentially. Whether we have somebody as generous as Jaehaerys or Allison around at the moment is a different matter. Andrew Kay saying fair play to Tyrion Lannister, pushing on after such torture, and his move with the Treasury really forced Rhaenyra into harsh, unpopular decisions that she never quite recovered from, in my opinion. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Um, Kelly Summers saying even a well-intentioned High Septon might grant an annulment since it was clear both performed under duress and unconsummated. Yeah, you'd hope so. Um, uh, and let's have a quick flick through. Um, And yeah, I think with that, I will probably start to talk a little bit about what we've got coming up on this channel over the next few weeks. And I think the main thing to say is we've got obviously House of the Dragon is coming up in 3-4 weeks. I lose track. You will see content on my main channel increasingly start to pivot over towards that. I hopefully will be able to provide a full amount of coverage, breakdowns of each episode as they come out. I'll be doing pre-show live streams here on IDG Live before every episode of House of the Dragon. And maybe also a few short videos as well as we're going on. Who knows? So keep an eye out for that. Until then, for the next few weeks, the normal Lord of the Rings videos are coming out. I've got another one in the mini series on Varys we've got going on, as well as the Maesters. I kind of hinted at this one a little bit earlier. It's fascinating. When the Maesters ruled the Seven Kingdoms, there was a moment just after the Dance of the Dragons when the Maesters, or one Maester in particular, had more power. I mean this quite literally, more political power than anyone has ever had in the entire history of the Seven Kingdoms. The question is, what did he do with that power? Okay, that's all coming up. If you are, well, patrons, first of all, thank you again. Moderators, it's been quite a long stream, and I only said thank you to you once. Thank you. You've been doing a fantastic job, as you always do. I hugely appreciate it. If you are watching back a little bit later than appearing somewhere around here, going to be a link to other live streams I've done appearing somewhere around here. It's a link to my Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so, and thank you if you do. But that is all for this time. I will be back same time next week. Until then, take care.